After Christian's death, the girl came to the church to pray for the last time and hoped that her wish would come true. He was her only hope to continue living in this world, but now he was gone, and she felt like all was lost. With bare feet, she stepped along the path that covered the creaking plank floor and felt only despair. From the feeling of hopelessness, she was so weak that at some point her leg disobediently buckled and the girl fell to the floor. Grief from the death of her beloved overwhelmed her, but he did not just die. Christian was killed, and she guessed who did it. The girl already doubted that there was a God in the world and whether Christian was destined to die abandoned like this. She also didn't know if there was a reason for her life in this world, but she was willing to give her life instead of his. With the last hope, she prayed to God to save her beloved, but instead took her herself. One day, something happened, and this girl was reborn into another personality and was now called Hillary. At first, she thought she had fallen asleep while reading a book, and when she woke up, she felt like a character. But only this character did not appear in a single line of the novel that she read that evening. Approaching the mirror, the girl saw that the reflection of a very beautiful girl was looking at her. Hillary turned out to be a simple girl without a family, but at the same time she was very prosperous for no reason. In one of the rooms, she saw that she had a lot of all kinds of treasures, gold and precious stones. Usually such characters appear in novels to save someone or change the plot of the original story. But now, the girl didn't know why she had become a character, nor what she was going to do with this myriad wealth. But then she thought that she could become a fan of her beloved, as well as buy herself a status and go to the ball. The salesman she approached thought she was just crazy, but then he saw a bag full of gold coins in front of her. Rejoicing at such unforeseen wealth, the man immediately gave Hillary a piece of paper, according to which she was now a noblewoman. After buying a noble status, the girl prepared herself properly, wearing a beautiful outfit, and went to the ball. After all, only there she had to meet the main character, who has pearl hair and aqua eyes. Next to this girl, Hillary felt as if she was breathing rays of light. There was also a prince named John with the perfect combination of golden eyes and dark hair. For writers, such an image of characters caused girls to feel satisfied with their mania for dark-haired, handsome men. The girl could not believe that now she would be able to see her favorite characters up close. There was also another character at the ball who was heartless and sometimes made very cruel decisions for the sake of the goal. But he was also the sweetest man in the world and limited with communication with the main character. His fate was unhappy, and in the end he was rejected by a woman and he was left with unrequited love. Hillary believed that such a handsome and cool man could not be found anywhere else. This was her favorite, and now she spent a lot of money just to see these characters at the ball. When these three gathered together, they looked like a masterpiece that could not be admired. But Hillary didn't dare to approach them and say hello because there was an aura that she couldn't reach. Since she was reborn as an extra character, she couldn't greet them. But even in spite of her presence, this world moved as it was intended, and she wanted to do good to it. Julia had divine healing powers and always showed love on the side of the weak. She was called the only hope in an empire where all kinds of greed and deceit were rampant. Prince John, who was to become her husband, was in love with her, as well as his best friend Marquis Christian. John always supported his chosen one, considering her every action and choice to be correct. In turn, Christian promised that he would never leave her and would stay with her in any situation. However, there were also evil people in the person of Duke Oliver and his daughter Carolyn, who had great power. The Duke's daughter wanted to marry the prince and become empress, so she sent the disease to Julia. And she made it a condition for the crown prince that he must accept the engagement to her if he did not want Julia to die. John could not allow this, so he left his beloved and entered into an unwanted marriage. And in the end, Christian decided to avenge his friend and beloved, forcing the Duke and his daughter to drink poisonous tea. The Marquis thought that now they would live happily again, but Julia found out about his act and was very upset. The girl did not want to listen to any apologies from him and asked never to show herself again. But Christian could not understand why his beloved was so upset, because he only wanted to save his friends. However, after this incident, Julia turned her back on him forever and stopped communicating with him forever. Soon she married Prince John, and their lavish wedding was celebrated throughout the empire. By this time, a year had passed, and from the moment Hillary got into this novel, she was just waiting for the end. She hoped that she would now be able to return to her world, as Julia and John looked very happy. Hillary also hoped that her beloved Christian would also be happy somewhere behind the scenes. She wanted this smart and handsome man not to get hung up on fleeting love and live on. Still, Hillary had hoped to see him once more, but he never came, and she decided it was time to go back. Leaving her beloved, the girl could only pray for him, but one day later, a year later, she met him. Only now he did not look the same as described in the novel, and he looked emaciated and sickly. Christian stood in front of Hillary like a ghost, and she realized that this man was on the verge of death. A year ago, waking up in the morning, the girl thought that, having returned to reality, now she can only dream of a rich life. But she would be able to see her family and friends, although she knew that no one would believe her about such a journey. Hillary understood that this romance was over, but she still missed her favorite characters. And then, looking around, she realized that she had never been returned to her original world. The girl thought that it happened by accident, and when she woke up next time, everything would work. But a day passed, then 2, then a week and months, and Hillary remained in the world where she had come. She waited another year, but she never managed to get out of this affair, no matter how much she wanted to. In addition, she had given away all her wealth to charity and was now living in a mountain lodge. Hillary felt afraid that she would have to live in a world where she had no family, no friends, not even acquaintances. She was frightened by the future, which she could not influence, but she was even more frightened when she read in the newspaper again about another unsuccessful suicide of the Marquise. Christian lost his will to live after being abandoned by his best friend and the woman he loved dearly. And all this year after the end, he tried to end his life, but each time it was unsuccessful. Hillary had the impression that this man was constantly being stopped and rescued by someone. But still, she hoped that he would come to his senses and live happily ever after, and she continued to pray for it. The girl also prayed that with the next awakening she would see her native ceiling and her book in her hands. Only this never happened, and it seemed to Hillary that this reality was just mocking her. The girl did not understand why this was happening to her. She could neither return nor see Christian's happy life. She even began to think that if everything continued like this, then she should also disappear from this world. Going into the forest, trying to get lost there, at that moment she heard footsteps approaching her. And when I looked up, I saw Christian in front of me, who was also in very bad shape. For a moment, Hillary thought it was just a dream, because she had already stopped believing that she would ever be able to see him. But suddenly Christian turned around in silence and was about to leave, and then she called to him, hoping not to lose him this time. He responded, and the girl realized that this was not a dream, which made her feel much better. At this moment, on the other hand, the voices of people who were looking for the missing Marquis began to be heard. Christian immediately pressed the girl to him and covered her mouth with his hand, and she could not believe that she was so close to him. After waiting for a while and making sure that the people were gone, the Marquis let go of his hand and Hillary was able to speak. She realized that someone was looking for this man and offered her help, thinking that something had happened. The girl invited him to her house, where there was a bit of a mess since she lived alone and had no guests. Christian apologized to her first for causing her trouble, but she was not in the least angry. Hillary still couldn't believe that this wasn't a dream, and that Christian, whom she couldn't approach before, was now sitting in front of her alive. She asked what had happened to him in the forest, but she did not insist on an answer. The guy just wanted to disappear from this world, and when he saw that this girl lived alone in the forest, he realized that she also had something to say. Hillary admitted that she also experiences this and cannot return to her friends and family, to her country. She used to think that everything would work out, but a lot of time has passed and her hope of returning has completely faded. Listening to the story of his new acquaintance, Christian realized that their desires were very similar, with a slight difference. He was abandoned by his friend and loved one, and now he cannot return to his normal life. So he came to the forest, thinking that death would be better than such a life, but he could not accept it either. Although it was difficult for him now, Christian still did not want to die, and decided that this girl was stronger than him in this choice. Hillary looked at him and couldn't believe that her character, with many beautiful qualities, was now so sad. The girl also noticed that he was very exhausted and thought about feeding him something. And still she saw him very bright, because she loved him very much, and missed that image and feeling of him. Then Hillary asked the guy to wait for a while, promising to come back, and thought she understood why she was stuck in this affair for a whole year. She thought that she was just destined to meet Christian, and now she was buying the best fruit for him at the nearest shop. Hillary had to return his will to live and decided to start with a hot meal and put him to bed under a warm blanket. The girl also wanted to chat with him a little and hoped that although they were not the main characters, they would be able to take care of each other. But when Hillary returned home, she found a terrible picture there, because Christian was lying on her floor and a bloody knife next to him. The girl immediately trembled all over with fear and could not believe that she had lost her beloved immediately after she met him. After all, she had already seen a spark of life in him and hoped that they would be able to live happily, at least him. Now she understood the real reason why she had come into this world, but she didn't understand why she had to go through this horror. Hillary held the dead body of her beloved in her arms and did not understand why he did this. Then she noticed a note on the table in which Christian apologized for staining her house with his blood and promised compensation. The next day, Christian's death made headline news in the newspapers, but only for a day. His death was quickly forgotten, as the pages of the newspaper were occupied by a scandal between Julia and John. Hillary couldn't believe that this could happen because they looked so happy. And now their beautiful love, which lasted more than 2 years, cooled down very quickly. Hillary's life after Christian's death became empty, and she was very angry because now she had no hope. The girl no longer had the strength to take care of her health or her soul. And now she went to church in despair without any hope, pushing people without noticing them. Some were angry with her for this, but others who had already seen her knew that she was very sad with grief. These people saw Hillary come to this temple every day and just wander around and hoped that she would still talk to the saint. However, she hadn't been in the temple since she became the prince's wife, and now she didn't care about the commoners. Meanwhile, Hillary kept thinking about Christian, who had always been the meaning of her life. But now he was gone, and this world ceased to exist for her. She wanted to leave it in any way. And although the Marquis died at his own hands, the girl still understood that he was actually killed. Hillary was sure that it was his friends who turned their backs on him and betrayed him, thus killing him. And now the girl prayed that her wish would come true, and she would be able to give her life instead of him. Exhausted by the feeling of suffering and hatred, Hillary raised her head and shouted about it to the whole temple. And suddenly she felt herself on something soft, and then she saw a ceiling familiar to her. The girl looked around and realized that she was in the room in which she lived before she moved to the mountains. However, she remembered for sure that she was in the temple and thought that one of the saints had brought her here. And then the girl suddenly felt that nothing hurt her and she felt very fine. Even her headache was gone, as if she had returned to the previous body she had fallen into at the beginning. Hillary wondered what that meant, and decided to look out the window to understand the situation. And as soon as she did this, she saw the street where the parade was taking place, meaning the wedding of Julia and John. Then, on the day of their wedding, a grandiose festival was arranged so that everyone could rejoice at their happiness. Hillary realized that somehow she had gone back in time, just on the wedding day of the main characters of the novel. But she didn't understand why, and at first she thought she shouldn't worry about it yet. And then she remembered that today was also the day when Marquis Christian would try to commit suicide for the first time. Quickly packing up, the girl found a cabman and immediately demanded that he take her to the Marquis. Hillary had hoped she had another chance, but now she wasn't going to reconcile the already married Julia with Christian. She remembered well that while John was burning with a fiery passion for Julia, the Marquis was giving her all his care. At the same time, this girl never thanked him for everything, taking these actions just for granted. Hillary soon reached the Marquis's house and wanted to make sure that his love for Julia would not be wasted. At the gate, she was stopped by the guards and the girl confessed to them that she had a very important message for Christian, but they still wouldn't let her in. And then she resorted to a trick and shouted that Saint Julia had appeared behind them. As they fearfully tried to see, Hillary slipped past them and rushed towards her target. The girl knew that a terrible event was going to happen on the second floor and immediately rushed there, pushing the servants. She also wanted to make Julia realize how much the Marquis had done for her and that her accusations were very cruel. Bursting into the room, Hillary shouted to the Marquis, who was already holding a dagger to his throat. This made him stop, and he decided to find out who dared to break in and prevent him. Hillary knew what he was going to do, but now she didn't know how to explain her sudden appearance to him. But most of all, the girl wanted Julia to regret breaking the Marquis's heart. Then she rushed at Christian and knocked the dagger out of his hands and knocked him to the floor. While he was trying to understand what was happening, Hillary already understood that now she would do everything for her abandoned beloved. Standing before him and putting her hand on her heart, she said that she wanted to become a marquise for Christian. The butler, William, who had taken care of Christian after the previous Marquis, was very shocked by what was happening. After all, he believed that his master, despite the fact that he was rejected, would be able to shake off failure and become his former self. And now he saw a complete mess in his room, and the master himself was about to kill himself, and immediately some girl burst into his room. Then the same girl proposed to Christian, and after all these events the butler could not think normally. Only Hillary was pleased that she had been able to do so and prevent the Marquis's suicide. The girl simply could not allow his death in the plot, and now decided to change the story a little. Her thoughts were interrupted by Christian, who wondered why she wanted to marry him. Hillary was trying to explain that this was not what she meant, when she suddenly noticed that the Marquis was laughing. He knew he looked frivolous at that moment, but he let her do as she wanted. The girl was a little shocked by such a sudden answer and understood that everything could not be so simple. Although Christian felt bad at that moment, he agreed. But this is not just some kind of request, but a wedding. She wanted to talk to him some more, but the Marquis asked her to make arrangements with the butler. And then Christian wanted to rest and ordered them both to get out of his room. Hilary tried to figure out what it was just now, and William only called the guards to guard the Marquis's peace. A little later, she went to the butler's office, where she presented him with her name and title. And William decided to ask the girl a few more impolite questions, but she was not upset. After all, according to the plot of the novel, this man was the most impolite character, and she prepared to listen to him. The butler began by telling Hilary to invade the Marquis of her own free will, ignoring the guards. In addition, she broke into his room and knocked him down, causing Christian to fall and hurt himself. But at the same time, William understood that if it were not for her appearance, then his master would no longer be alive, and for this, he was grateful. In the previous version, where Hilary did not appear, this man tried the most to prevent the Marquis's death. She understood this because Christian had not died in his mansion, and now she had to thank the butler. But William then continued that from the very threshold the girl tried to convey the message to the Marquis. And then she ran straight to his room as if she knew Christian was going to die, but Hilary didn't know how best to explain it. She knew that if she admitted that she had gone back in time, the butler would laugh at her. But the girl also understood that this was just a romance and she could attribute some superpowers. In addition, she intervened in Christian's life and now she is no longer superfluous, but a very important character. Hilary simply replied to the butler that she could see the future, so she rushed to the Marquis's aid. From William's reaction, the girl realized that he did not believe her and then decided to prove it by remembering one detail. She told of a pink diamond that the Marquis had asked the butler to give as a gift to St. Julia. But he never fulfilled the order, and now this diamond lies in the third drawer of the table in the Marquis's study. Only Christian and William knew about this fact, and the girl believed that it was enough to prove her abilities. The butler thought for a moment, and Hilary went on to tell him that the Marquis would continue to be mad in the future. And now she felt compelled to use her abilities to save his life. But then she added that she had to stay by his side to prevent him from trying to die again. And for this she needed authority. For this sole reason she believed that she should become a marquise. The girl also promised to give a receipt that she would never become the mistress of this house, and swore that she would never harm the Marquis. The butler listened to her, but he was not the one to decide such matters, and suggested that she speak to the Marquis the next day. Hilary was glad that she had managed to convince the butler and was about to leave the mansion. But William thought it was too late to return home and offered her to spend the night in the guest room. Left alone, Hilary felt that she was too tired, but she had also gone far. Now she had to think about a plan for further action, because her desire was to save the Marquis. Christian could not sleep at this time. He remembered the events of that evening and thought about what to do next. In his mind, he turned to Julia to give him at least some hint on how to proceed. And before going to bed, Hilary thought that she did not expect this from herself. And suddenly she saw an angel and a devil on her shoulders. She thought that it was they who encouraged her to allow herself such an impulsive act. And they only told her that she really wanted to become the wife of a marquise, and this was a very important stage in life. However, you can't undo what you've done, and after all, the girl was still inside the novel. But at the same time, she convinced herself that at first she was not going to become his wife, but just to be something like a secretary. The devil went on to say that she could clearly hear Hilary's desire to marry Christian. It's just that when the girl saw him standing on the verge of death, she realized that being a secretary was not enough. Therefore, she had to pretend to be a seer so that she could save the Marquise. This was her only and main goal in life, and then the devil and the angel agreed to help her. Then, the girl heard that they were always with her, but she could not understand who they were, because she no longer saw anyone in front of her. And then she opened her eyes and saw that morning had already come, and she realized that she had dreamed all this. Still, the dream seemed a little strange to her, and the girl wondered what it could mean. A little later, the butler visited her and asked how she slept, and she thanked her for such a soft bed. Then William noticed that the girl was looking forward to a response from the Marquis, which surprised him, because she could see the future. In response, Hilary asked how Christian was feeling and found out that he was much calmer today. The butler wondered again why Hilary could see the future but didn't. The girl explained that she can only see big and important events and not really small details. William apologized for his unfortunate joke, but the girl did not feel very comfortable from such jokes. Then the butler confessed that the Marquis had asked him something the day before, and that he had spent the whole night preparing the documents. Due to the fact that he had to stay up all night, Hillary even felt awkward in front of him. William also allowed the girl to familiarize herself with the documents and go to the marquee, but asked her to choose careful words. Hillary promised that everything would be fine and asked to bring them fruit punch and brandy when it was finished. Then the butler knocked on Christian's room, and the girl prepared for a very important conversation. When she entered the room, the marquis was sitting on his bed, slightly disheveled. Hillary was ready to meet him, but as soon as she saw his gaze, he immediately remembered that unfortunate event. Nevertheless, she pulled herself together and greeted the marquis politely, but he remained silent for the time being. The girl held her breath, and then the butler approached her, who prepared 2 packages of documents. He asked her to read them carefully and then discuss everything, and handed her a stack of papers. According to the documents, Hillary saw that she would enjoy the rights of the status of marquise. In addition, as a married couple, she had the right to the property of the Marquis Christian. But the girl did not need either the property or the money of her future husband, because she was not some kind of swindler. The butler took Hillary's wishes into account and promised to remove this part from the contract. William wanted to ask the Marquis something else, but he saw that he was already signing the documents. The butler was surprised because he hadn't even read or edited them, but Christian didn't care, as long as they stopped making noise. Not knowing what else to say, William didn't contradict him, and Hillary saw that grim look on his face again. Still, she decided to reach out to him and promise that he would never regret it. She even bowed and smiled sweetly at him, hoping that this would soften his gloomy mood at least a little. But Christian at that moment did not want to hear anyone, even her, and asked the girl to leave him. She and the butler left his room, and Hillary was about to go to the temple. William did not quite understand her intentions and wondered why she needed to go there now. But the girl was not going to stop there, and wanted to return something to the marquis. Hillary had already thought of something during the night and the morning, and she decided to start her plan with Julia. This girl, although she had divine power, was also a commoner, and her position in the temple was not stable. Christian donated the most fertile land to the temple for her, and this helped her achieve a respectable position. And then Julia became the wife of the crown prince and felt very happy. Hillary was very upset by such a plot because Julia did not even thank the marquis for his gifts. Hillary could not leave it like this, and decided to remind this girl of all that the Marquis had done for her when she arrived at the temple. The girl almost cursed this princess and wished that her neck would hurt from all Christian's offerings. Just as Hillary got out of the carriage and was about to go inside, she was stopped by an acolyte. He saw that the marquis's carriage had arrived and ran in such a way that he was out of breath, wanting to greet him. But he saw a girl in front of him and was surprised, and she explained that today she would be in Christian's place. Then Hillary introduced herself as the marquis's wife, which made the novice unfeigned bewilderment. He did not believe her and advised her to pretend better when she was lying, for everyone knew that the marquis would never forget Julia. And while this guy was trying to figure out how Hillary ended up in the carriage, she was already going about her business. The girl did not want to talk to such a scoundrel as he did and wanted to meet someone higher. The acolyte tried to contradict her, but was immediately punched in the face by a bag of gold, which Hillary had tossed him to shut up. And then she wanted to see the high priest, and the boy in the cassock agreed to accompany her to him and show her everything. Inside, she was greeted by another man in a cassock named Greg, but she knew that this man was not a high priest either. He was very busy and not easy to meet, so the person who met Hillary advised him to talk to him. To begin with, Greg wanted to clarify whether she was really the wife of the marquis, but the girl understood his suspicions. She told him briefly that they had only been married that day, and that the priest might send someone to the marquis to confirm it. Hillary also handed him a sheet of paper with Christian's signature and stamp on it, but Greg decided to double-check it just in case. The girl did not like this man from the very first minute and seemed to her a very suspicious type. As the conversation continued, Hillary said that she had come here on the occasion of donations from the marquis, and at the moment, she wanted to return the land that had been given to the temple because of Julia. This statement seemed to infuriate the priest, and he even began to shout that Hillary did not dare to demand such a thing. Greg stated that Hillary would incur the wrath of God for wanting to take away what was given to God. But the girl corrected him, because the land was given to the wife of the crown prince, who was glorified as a saint, and not to a god. And now that the saint was no longer in the temple, Hillary felt that the land was also unnecessary. She also knew that the priests had been blinded by greed and had appropriated Julia's property to the temple. After that, Greg asked the guest to wait for a while, and Hillary realized that her words had an effect. After all, if it didn't work, it would have been necessary to threaten the image of Julia and the clergy, and the girl was glad that it did not come to this. Still, she felt a little sorry that she couldn't tell how cold-blooded their saint really was. And while Hilary was thinking, a high priest came up behind her, whom she had not expected to see. He explained that he had been informed of everything and that the signature and seal of Marquis Christian had been checked. The documents turned out to be authentic, and now High Priest Thomas hoped that his children had not violated the boundaries during this time. Then he began to talk about why Hilary had come here, also wondering why she had decided to return the land. The girl repeated that she wanted to take the land back, but Thomas was sure that she had come this way in vain. He did not want to give her all the details, but made it clear that the temple could not return this site. Thomas only explained that the Marquis knew that the land would not belong entirely to Julia. The fact that the site now belongs to the temple upset Hilary, but she wasn't going to give up just like that. The girl decided to threaten the high priest that the next day there would be quite scandalous headlines in the newspapers. For example, about the cruelty of a saint who is admired by the whole world, or about a villain who used the marquis for the sake of his position. Thomas hadn't expected to hear that, but Hilary could tell from the look on his face that it was working. The high priest could not utter a word yet, and he knew that he was at a great disadvantage. But then he decided to pretend that he didn't know anything about it, and it sounded absurd. Only Hilary still did not accept the fact that the clergy could not do this and the temple did nothing for profit. And she decided to wipe the forced smile from Thomas's face, with which he tried to cover up his worries. Hilary suggested in the headline that the crown prince's wife is a faithful dog of the clergy, and also that Julia bared her duplicity, selfishly using pure love and taking over the great land. Hilary also recalled that aristocrats still do not understand why a simpleton from the people became the wife of the crown prince. Julia, of course, has a lot of support from the people, but at the same time, not all aristocrats recognize her. And if everyone finds out that this saint and the temple acted together, then nothing good will come of it. Thomas was discouraged at being threatened, but Hilary was not a noble woman, so she didn't care. And the girl also promised that if the high priest did not return the land, she would immediately inform the emperor about it. She was going to talk about how the temple steals donations and cares only about itself. Thomas was already visibly nervous, but he was sure that this girl had no evidence. But Hilary knew that if she reported to the emperor, the temple would be subjected to a scrutiny, and there would be other violations. The girl also assured that she had evidence that would speed up the process, and Thomas decided to consult with his people about the best course of action. In fact, Hilary was bluffing, even though she knew that the temple was not as clean as it seemed, and that something might still be revealed. And judging by their reaction, she did everything right. After that, the girl offered them to settle everything quietly and peacefully. As she approached the high priest, Hilary hinted that he understood perfectly well what she meant, and he, in turn, was well aware that now he had no other choice. In the evening, Hilary returned to her now house, and there she met the agitated butler. He didn't know why she was so late in the temple and began to worry, but the girl assured him that everything was fine. And then she took out a document that showed that the land that had previously belonged to the temple was now again in the possession of the Marquis. William could not believe that this simple girl had managed to get these lands back and was very happy. As she told the butler with what face the high priest had given these lands, Christian watched them from the window. Hilary felt his gaze on her, but when she turned around, he had already left the observation site. William then advised that the lady should go to him, and she herself told this pleasant news. The girl would have been happy to do this, but she understood that Christian was not used to her yet and asked the butler to do it. He agreed, and also offered Hilary to rest and promised to send a maid to help. Remembering how she had treated the priest, the girl did not notice how the whole day had passed. She was sure that she would quickly take revenge with such a start, and the next day she decided to check the condition of the land first. Thinking about her future plans, the girl did not notice how she passed out and fell asleep. And in the imperial palace, Prince John had already been informed that the Marquis had a wife, and he intended to check it personally. Mrs. Hilary herself was sitting in Christian's office the next day, and he started talking about her act. The girl, in response, began to apologize that she acted without his permission. At the same time, she did not understand why this was happening now, because she was going to go to inspect the land. And suddenly she was unexpectedly called to him by the owner, who had never looked at her before. The first thing that came to Hilary's mind was that he didn't like that she had returned the lands and would now kick her out. But Christian spoke to her a little differently, and then she saw that he was looking directly at her. The Marquis asked her name, and the girl immediately told him the full information of her name and what family she was from. Continuing to look at the newspaper, Christian clarified that she had not been an aristocrat before, and then he asked what was the real reason why she wanted to marry him. The girl was confused. She did not expect such a question, at least for now, and thought about the answer. Christian even left his reading and looked at his wife attentively again. Then she just shouted furiously that she hated the crown prince and his wife very much. At the same time, Hillary understood that such stupid excuses would not work and moved on to the next step. The girl wanted the two to apologize to the Marquis and also wanted him to stop thinking about death. The Marquis decided that Julia and John had crossed her path, but she clarified that it was not her, but Christian himself. And now she only wanted these two scoundrels to regret their insidious choice. Before that, the Marquis met with the butler and he told him that this girl could foresee the future. Christian looked at him skeptically and decided that it was time for him to resign if he was already thinking about it. But William told him how he had learned from Hillary that she already knew about the Marquis's intention to commit suicide. He also said that this girl knows the story about the diamond and advised to write a refusal to transfer property in the marriage contract. But William also pointed out that Hillary had returned the lands to them and was now sure that she was taking care of the Marquis. Christian remembered that she really had no claim to status or wealth and had returned the land on her own initiative. Now he himself understood that the girl was doing everything for him. But he did not understand why she would do it, because they had never even met before. The girl did not know what to answer to this question, because he would not understand the care of someone who did not know him before. The Marquis was curious if there was another reason why Hillary had chosen him, but she hadn't seen her. With no answer, the girl decided to go on the offensive and assumed that he did not like what she was doing. And if so, then she is ready to sign a divorce agreement right now and leave his house. Hillary still felt like the third wheel, and if all this did not please the Marquis, then she would simply retreat. Christian hesitated for a moment, and then admitted that he had received a letter from Prince John. He knew it was their business, and Hillary had to finish it herself, and he wasn't going to get involved. Although in fact he was interested in how it would end, he allowed his wife to do as she saw fit. On the one hand, Hillary could breathe a sigh of relief and promised to return after meeting with the Crown Prince. But the girl also needed confirmation that she was not an imposter, and Christian promised to write a letter by hand. Hillary thanked her husband for his understanding and help, and he allowed her to go to prepare. In the hallway, she met the agitated butler again, who asked her not to take everything personally. But the girl was no longer worried about this and assured that now everything was fine, and also said that she needed somewhere. When William learned that his mistress was going to visit the Crown Prince, he immediately promised to immediately prepare everything. The butler immediately summoned almost all the servants and ordered them to prepare everything to the highest standard. The maids learned that their mistress would meet Lady Julia as well and agreed to do their best. After a while, everything was ready and Hillary did not even recognize herself in the mirror. How much more beautiful she had become with cosmetics and jewelry. She had been quite pretty before, but now she saw herself as just a beauty, and the servants fully supported her. However, Hillary did not quite understand why everyone took such care of her, despite the fact that she had become a marquise so suddenly. And the maids cried out to her to turn up the heat of the prince just as she had done to the marquise's lands. And although Julia was everyone's favorite in this novel, Hillary was still glad that she herself was now trusted. We looked good. The girl was going to go to the meeting and never lose. Although, remembering how beautiful Lady Julia was, Hillary was a little afraid that she might lose. Soon she arrived at the palace and greeted the prince and his wife properly. John was a little surprised to see that it was the Marquis's wife in front of him, and Julia thought that they had already met somewhere. Hillary remembered the first time she had seen Julia when she first came into this world. At that moment, this girl was dressed quite simply, but at the same time elegantly. While in the temple, Julia healed people's wounds while giving everyone her smile. At that time, she was really a saint for everyone, but now this heroine is completely different. Hillary did not understand how it was possible not to love someone like Julia, but now she appeared only in luxurious places. She became a member of the imperial family and goes everywhere only with her husband, the crown prince. And in response to her when they met, Hillary assured her that she was most likely mistaken for someone else. Soon they were seated at the tea table, and the Marquise provided the marriage certificate. She also submitted a letter written by the Marquise's hand to the prince for consideration. John recognized his old friend's handwriting, and then Julia asked to be allowed to see it too. She looked carefully at the sheet of paper and realized that the letter was indeed from Christian. But at the same time, she did not understand how the Marquis could marry so quickly, because only recently he had fallen to her in love. John agreed with his wife because Christian was not the kind of person who hastily makes important decisions. However, his letter and marriage document stated otherwise, and Hillary arrived in the Marquise's carriage. Then the prince had to accept the truth that his friend had married this sweet girl. Hillary could tell from their faces that they were still hesitant, but that didn't change the fact that she was a marquise. The prince still continued to look at this girl with distrust and believed that she was now abusing her power. After all, he already knew that she had returned Christian's lands while threatening the high priest. Only Hillary didn't see any threats, she just got an answer to her logical explanations. But the prince believed that if such an explanation posed a threat to someone, then it was a threat. And the girl corrected him that it was more like extortion using the position. Then Julia spoke, claiming that the temple had no private property, and everything dedicated to it belonged to the gods. Then Hillary hinted that the princess used the powers granted to her by God only for the sake of the imperial family. The girl recalled that there was a time when she ran to church and prayed to meet the saint. However, Julia no longer had time to deal with people like her, and Hillary found herself at death's door because she was rejected. Having become the wife of the crown prince, Saint Julia is no longer concerned with ordinary people. And at that unfortunate moment in the temple, Hillary realized that the Holy Virgin no longer belonged to the people. After such an act of the princess, it could be safely said that her gift no longer corresponded to God's will. Julia froze with surprise and did not know what to say to the marquise. But then the prince intervened and ordered Hillary to watch her tongue, because she was talking to his wife. The girl immediately apologized for her words and then asked her question to the prince. She wanted to know if he wanted Marquis Christian to donate these lands to the temple. John remembered that in fact his friend had donated these lands to the saint because he had tender feelings for her. Then Hillary assumed that the prince wanted her husband to be shackled by his old love for the princess. Neither John nor Julia had anything to say at that moment, and the marquise realized that the two could not argue at all. At the same time, she wanted Christian to forget his former love forever, and for this it was necessary that his past actions were clarified for everyone. Hillary then told them that she did not resent them because of her husband's past, because now he would have a better future. But in fact, the girl planned to arrange ruins for them from their future and avenge her beloved. John saw that there was no manners or respect in this girl, and he did not understand how she had invaded the marquise's life at all. However, the process of marriage for men and women is different, and it is not necessary to experience ardent love. Then the prince asked why Christian chose her because many girls from noble families ran after him. And then Hillary decided to give away that she, like the saint, also had some kind of superpower. The two spouses prepared to listen to her attentively, but her answer was that she knew how to see the future. And as Hillary had suspected, Prince John did not believe her words, as he had always been a skeptic in such matters. However, the girl noticed that Julia was quite shocked by what she heard, because she considered herself the most special. Hillary also decided to prove to the prince that she was telling the truth and could tell him about the future. And John heard that soon they would catch a major robber who was agitating the capital of the empire. Upon returning home, Hillary told the marquis how her meeting had gone, and he was particularly interested in the moment of the future. Christian assumed that she was referring to a thief who only stole jewelry at balls. The girl confirmed, but also admitted that the prince still did not believe her, but was angry until the very end. Then the marquis became curious about how Julia reacted to this and learned that she was only asking for the return of the lands. But Hillary had to explain Christian's intentions clearly to her at the moment when he gave her the lot. At last the princess understood, or so the marquise had hoped. But the girl also noticed some confusion in her husband and thought that he still loves the princess. Although Christian had just given her the land as a gift, and when he got it back, he had forgotten about it completely. Then he decided to express his gratitude to his wife for doing this for him. But it was enough for her to be able to see his face every day, although she was pleased with the moment when he leaned over her. She even wondered how exactly he was going to express his gratitude, but he suddenly deviated sharply. Christian asked what she wanted for her work and asked her not to hesitate. But Hillary did it for him without really counting on anything, although she still needed something. The girl thought for a while and then asked the marquis for permission to hire a tutor. At the same time, she dreamed of Christian and could not forget the moment when he was so close to her. The desire to hire a tutor seemed a little strange to the marquis, but he had already promised her and asked if she had anyone in mind. Hillary noticed Madame Elizabeth, who worked in the salon, and Christopher wondered why she was the one. But the girl wanted this woman and did not understand why her husband reacted to it this way. Madame Elizabeth was the closest aristocrat to Lady Julia, and Hillary decided to take her in for training. Some time ago, 2 women who opposed the princess were poisoned with poisonous tea. After his death, the nobles changed their position and no longer opposed Julia. But still, there were some who were not happy with the prince's wife, and Hillary decided to use them. At the same time, Madame Elizabeth treated the princess with favor, but the marquise decided to choose her for other reasons. This woman really treated Julia well and urged her not to give up her love for John. Elizabeth also taught the princess court etiquette and became a spiritual mentor for her. Hilary knew that this woman couldn't pretend she didn't know about the whole situation. In addition, the girl understood that Julia would certainly take measures to enlist the support of the nobility in the near future. For this reason, Hilary decided that she should be the first to get Madame Elizabeth on her side. Christian did not pester his wife with any more questions and told her to entrust the matter to William. The Marquis did not know what Hilary was up to, but he was still grateful to her. The girl only thanked her husband in return, rejoicing that Christian treated her well. The girl was not just happy. She was ready to jump with happiness, but so far she controlled herself. Already in her room, she was able to give free rein to her feelings and jumped for joy on the bed like a child. At the same time, the girl understood that all her efforts paid off in full, and she believed that it would only get better in the future. The next day, the first thing Hilary did was ask the butler to contact Madame Elizabeth. She knew that she ought to invite the woman to her house, but she replied by asking the Marquise to come to her. Only the girl did not want to make an impression on the madam as arrogant, because she, like Julia, had become a noblewoman from a commoner. Hilary also asked the butler to help her get ready for the trip and was ready to go to Elizabeth's. The girl did not expect that the madame would answer her so soon, but she did not want to delay her visit, and very soon she was at her house. There she was met by a young man who worked for Elizabeth, and the Marquise noticed how everything in the house was shining. Hilary introduced herself to the servant and told him that Madame Elizabeth had made an appointment for her there. The young man invited the girl to come in and wait, and she immediately noticed the riveted glances of other people in the house. Hilary even felt a little awkward and thought that she had said her title too loudly. And then she thought that the rumors about what happened in the temple spread very quickly, and that's why they look at her like that. For a moment, Hilary wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, when she heard that someone was already calling her. Madame Elizabeth came out to her, who, calling her, saved her from an uncomfortable situation and looks. Madame invited the guest to come with her and also offered some snacks and sweets. Already in the study, Elizabeth admitted that she had not expected such a quick visit from the Marquise, but was glad of it. Madame also admitted that mostly people call her to their homes and was a little surprised by a personal visit. But Hilary wanted to express her serious intentions with a personal visit, so she came. And the reason Elizabeth attracted her was because of Lady Julia's honesty and modesty. Making a sad expression on her face, Hilary confessed to Madame that she really needed her help. Elizabeth was agitated when she saw her visitor's sadness and was ready to help her with anything. The Marquise began by saying that she had no one else to ask for help, so she turned to Madame. Madame treated her guest with sincere sympathy and, handing her a handkerchief, asked her to share her grief. The girl began her story with her stepfather, Lord Adam, who had no children of his own. Therefore, he adopted Hilary, intending to send her later to high society. But due to her low origin, her place in social society was only in a corner on the outskirts. Now she has received the great title of Marquise, but at the same time she lacks a lot. Hilary expressed her hope that Madame Elizabeth could help her and saw that she was willing to agree. Of course, the girl came up with this whole story, but she needed to win the madam in this way. Hilary believed that the role of a young, but at the same time modest and reasonable simpleton would help her. And even if she fails to reach the level of Julia, then as a compassionate person, Elizabeth will help her. Madame thought for a while, and the Marquise thought that this woman had doubts. However, she was the first character to lend her helping hand, and Hilary didn't understand where she had gone wrong. The Marquise even decided that Elizabeth did not like her and began to press that her request was difficult for Madame. Madame replied that it was not at all difficult for her to accept the Marquise's request, but that she was very interested in something. The woman later confessed that she was curious as to how the Marquis had so suddenly married Hilary. The girl realized that it was this sudden decision of Christian that tormented Elizabeth so much and was ready to continue her strategy. It was even good for her because it meant that Hilary was interesting to this woman and she continued to attract her to her side. The girl admitted that she had admired the Marquis for a very long time, but at the same time she was very worried about him. After all, the girl knew that Christian was heartbroken after the Crown Prince's wedding ceremony with Julia, and it was that evening that Hilary turned to him with a proposal to unite their lives in marriage. The Marquis was devastated at the time, and it was probably for this reason that he agreed to accept the offer. Having received such an incredible favor from him, Hilary decided that it would be right to repay it. At that moment, Elizabeth realized that this girl was going to the temple in order to do something pleasant for her husband. The Marquise confirmed that her husband had generously given what belonged to him, but his generosity went unanswered. Everybody knew how much attention the Marquise paid to Lady Julia, and everyone was worried about it. Hilary then continued that she knew her place and understood that she was no match for a princess. But until Mr. Christian regains his composure and gives her the divorce paper, she wants to repay him. Elizabeth was a little confused by such words, because the girl had already successfully returned his lands to him. Still, she understood Hilary's feelings well, and so she agreed to help with her request. The girl was now satisfied, and Madame Elizabeth decided to draw up a plan for her education at once. Soon Madame was teaching Hilary everything: social etiquette, precautions, and even fashion. At first, it was difficult for the girl to remember so much information because the madam taught everything she knew. A few days later, a maid named Clarice approached Hilary and told her that the robber had already been caught. This pleased the Marquise, for he had been disturbing the capital for months, but this morning he was caught. Continuing to do her homework, the girl thought that now the prince and Julia would stop doubting her. Hilary even wanted to look at their faces at that moment when they were told the news. In addition, the girl became very close to Elizabeth and was used to learning something all the time, so she understood that things were going smoothly. And before Clarice left, the Marquise asked her how her husband was feeling now. The maid hesitated for a moment, but then explained that the Marquis was receiving a guest at the moment. This surprised Hilary a little, because she didn't think Christian was in a position to receive anyone now. Then the Marquise began to inquire who had come, and learned that a man named Harold had come. This name was sometimes used by the Crown Prince when he needed to hide his person. Now he came to the Marquis immediately after the thief was caught, and Hilary decided to go to her husband at once. At the same time, the girl could not understand why Christian did not call her and hurried so that nothing happened. At the door to the Marquis's office, Hilary saw the butler, who seemed to be eavesdropping. When William saw her mistress, he tried to explain to her that he was just worried if something went wrong. But the girl understood him perfectly well and asked him not to apologize for such an act. Then she herself sat down next to the butler, and he said that up to that moment they had just talked. A few seconds after Hilary put her ear against the door, she heard very suspicious noises. The sound was like breaking glass, and she did not wait any longer, fearing for the life of her beloved. Bursting into the office, the girl saw the broken glass of the window, as well as the bloody fist of the Marquis. John was standing next to her husband, but he did not say a word at that moment. He just watched. Christian himself looked very bad, and Hilary, frightened, immediately rushed to him. She began to ask what was wrong with him and how he was feeling, and was also going to call a doctor. At that moment, Prince John responded, who wanted to say something else to his former friend. Hilary realized that the Marquis had hurt himself because of him, and immediately began to yell at the prince and demand that he get out of here. The girl was very angry and was ready to do anything at this moment, just to prevent her from harming her husband anymore. John stood for a while, but realized that there was nothing more he could do at that moment. And while Hilary continued to examine her husband, he turned around and headed for the exit. Christian looked very bad, and the Marquise wanted to help him sit down on the bed. The girl asked him to be patient just a little because the doctor should come very soon. The Marquis tried to pretend that he didn't care about her efforts, but she could see that his face betrayed his feelings. And then Christian felt even worse, and the girl could barely hold him in her arms so that he would not fall. After a while, Hilary was already sitting by her husband's bed, where he fell asleep after a doctor's examination. The doctor explained that his wound was not deep, and this usually happens when people in a rush of feeling cannot restrain themselves. The girl was glad that everything would be fine with Christian, but she also really wanted to know what they were talking about. At that moment, the Marquis opened his eyes, and Hilary even shuddered a little from the surprise. First of all, Christian asked her if she knew that Prince John would be coming today. Hilary realized that he was referring to her superpower, but explained that such details were beyond her control. The Marquis then admitted that he didn't really want to host the prince today, and then he added that not only today but in general he never wanted to see him again. Christian began to remember their meeting, how John came to him, and seeing the condition of his former friend, began to ask questions. The Marquis did not want to answer him, and only sarcastically said that the prince was enjoying his honeymoon. But John had really come to see to him if the Marquis had really married Hilary. Christian quipped again that not only one prince is allowed to marry and everyone has the right to do so. Only the prince found this marriage suspicious and not at all like the usual actions of the Marquis. But now Christian saw no point in being cautious about life. Moreover, it was because of this carelessness that the Marquis fell so madly in love with Lady Julia. Christian then confessed to his former friend that on the day he got married, he decided to end his life. And this woman stopped him when, using the gift of her foresight, she burst into his room. Then the girl asked the Marquis to marry her, and he agreed, and then added that this did not concern the prince in general. Then John began to ask why Christian did not tell him anything if he felt such pain. But at that moment, the Marquis and the prince were still friends, and he simply did not dare to interfere with his happiness. Now Christian felt guilty about everything, both for falling in love and for wanting to die. John still didn't understand why his friend was like this now, because he wasn't like that before. He also said that Julia was also worried about the Marquise and did not even sleep all night because of this. But Christian didn't understand why. If she was so worried, she hadn't written him a single letter. Then he realized that his former friend had come just to mock him and demanded that he get out of his house. At that very moment, out of great rage, Christian slammed his fist on the glass and injured himself. Right now, he thought that his act was arrogant. In fact, he wished these two to be happy. It's just that when he was pushed to the edge of the cliff, he was able to look into his heart and couldn't bear it. Therefore, Christian decided to die, and then he was disappointed that he managed to survive unexpectedly. And now, thanks to Hilary, the Marquis understood something and decided that from now on he would be honest with himself. For this, he was very grateful to his wife and even smiled at her a little, which pleased her. But then the girl began to argue that it was not worth thanking her at all, because she did it for his own sake. Hilary considered the Marquis the meaning of her life and was ready to do anything for the sake of the man she loved. In the meantime, the prince returned to his palace and told the princess how his meeting with the Marquis had gone. Julia couldn't believe that Christian had decided to commit suicide because they got married. And she was also very surprised that this girl Hilary was able to stop him and now became a Marquise. Now Julia had no doubt that the girl was a real clairvoyant, but the prince was tormented by some doubts. John decided that he first needed to find out what the true purpose of her Marquis was. Julia thought about it and soon agreed with her husband because it really looked strange. Hilary, on the day the Marquis opened her heart, decided to live for him again. After a while, the Marquise was invited to visit, where the mistress of the house declared her to be the person everyone was waiting for. A few days ago, when Hilary was in class, she had received an invitation from Countess Pamela. The girl showed this invitation to Madame Elizabeth, and she was extremely surprised at such an invitation. The Countess invited many aristocrats to tea because she wanted to make new acquaintances. The teacher knew about the upcoming tea party, but she did not expect that an invitation would be sent so soon. This Countess was a very active person, and she was not inferior in authority to Madame Elizabeth. But Hilary couldn't understand why Madame was so concerned about this invitation now. Elizabeth, meanwhile, wondered if the Marquise would respond to the invitation, which she considered a problem. The girl understood that she was invited more out of interest, because no one had heard of her before. And now she had so unexpectedly taken the title from the Marquis and had taken back the lands from the temple. Hilary knew there could be a scandal, but she also needed to know what the Countess was thinking. After all, in the original, this aristocrat showed an absolutely neutral attitude towards Julia. In addition, Pamela does not look like a saint or Madame Elizabeth, and this is what Hilary considered a problem. And the Countess was not an important character, and the girl now did not know how to cope with her. Madame, meanwhile, continued to worry because she was not an ordinary aristocrat. Hilary also didn't know what the neutral topic of conversation would be if she agreed to come. And now the girl was racking her brains over this because she did not know that Pamela liked. In addition, the girl had just begun to learn manners and etiquette, but she could not ignore the Countess either. But everything Hilary did was only for the sake of her beloved Marquis Christian, and decided that she would agree. And Elizabeth realized that even in such a situation, her student thinks only about her husband. And if Hilary refuses the invitation, the Countess will spread bad rumors about her. Elizabeth decided to help this girl in any way she could, because she considered her a very kind person. Hilary realized that Elizabeth was fully supportive of everything and decided to accept the invitation. After a while, the Marquise was already at the Countess's estate, where she began by thanking everyone for coming. The aristocratic girls, in turn, also began to thank her for the invitation. Hilary herself thought she was sitting very close to the Countess, but Madame had already taught her some tricks. Meanwhile, Pamela announced that there was a man among them whom everyone was looking forward to. Then she turned her head to the Marquise, as if she expected her to begin to say her greetings at once. Hilary paused for a while, and Pamela then asked her to introduce herself to the other guests. At this time, the girl remembered the lesson of Elizabeth, who said that the age group would be high at the tea party. For this reason, it is to be expected that the Countess will look down on Hilary since she is only 20 years old. Then Madame decided to share with the student the secret of how these ladies would immediately like her. And already at the reception, while the Marquise was remembering this lesson, the Countess asked why she was still silent. Hilary explained that she was a little nervous because she was among such famous ladies. The girl said this very politely and modestly, from which the other ladies were only surprised. They realized that the Marquise was not what was rumored, and the servants of the temple were most likely exaggerating. Hilary also remembered from the lesson that it was important to flatter, but the most important thing was to make a first impression. At the table, the atmosphere of harmony was overshadowed by some anxieties, because the ladies were interested in how Hilary became a marquise. They were also interested in the details of the dispute with the temple over the return of lands. The girl used all the methods that Elizabeth taught her in the conversation, and it worked. But then she decided that the time had come to find out what the Countess thought of Lady Julia. In addition, Hilary really wanted to spoil the image of this princess at least a little. Only Pamela was a little ahead of the girl and asked if the Marquis was tormented by her love experiences. Hilary was well aware that someone would definitely ask this question at the tea party, and she was ready. Elizabeth warned her in advance that they would not ask about this out of curiosity, but would decide to test her reaction. The Marquise thought that if she pretended to be a fool, everyone would look down on her or ignore her altogether. She also understood that today's event would definitely spread throughout the city and reach Julia's ears. And the ladies heard from Hilary that she was not at all worried, for the Marquis considered it a long-forgotten past. The girl returned home after communicating with people very tired, but she was glad that the tea party bore fruit. The ladies sympathized with her words that she was secretly confronting Julia and reacted positively. In addition, the girl realized that these aristocrats do not like the princess, and this will help her plan her further actions. From the Countess, Hilary learned that Julia invited young girls close to her to the imperial palace. The other ladies at the tea party were older and did not like that the princess did this to them. Pamela still asked them to hold on to their burrows, although she was lowborn but still a saint, and now they would wait for an invitation. Hilary even thought that this was the reason why they had maintained a neutral stance, since Julia had bored them well. The girl was also curious if the prince would call her again because her prophecy came true. Then she would meet the princess as well, and invited the Countess to convey some question from her, if any. The girl explained to the ladies, who were staring at her puzzledly, that she had recently brought a letter to the imperial palace. And soon she will have some more things to do there, so she can tell Julia Pamela's words. The Countess pondered over this, and the Marquise realized that His Majesty was interested in her. The girl also realized that she had touched this aristocrat to the core, and she responded with a very nice, albeit feigned, smile. The Marquise also understood the meaning of this smile, and it meant that she also pinned them to the wall, and in the future she will be able to use them if she can provide the information they need from Julia. And also, if Hilary attacks the Countess, a valuable member of social circles after Madame, then it will be much easier to take revenge. The girl just couldn't wait to see their confusion, and she looked at the diary again. In this notebook, all the main events of the original history of this novel were recorded. First, there were notes about Christian, and then Hilary notated the end of John and Julia. She reconstructed the events from memory after the regression, and now it is the basis of her prediction. The Marquise flipped through a few pages, wondering where she could use her idea. Having found it, the girl thought that it would be more suitable for John, but something was also needed against the princess. Hilary wanted to find exactly what would knock down Saint Julia the most. And after a short time, she remembered something and was sure that it would definitely stun the princess. The next morning, Hilary went to her husband, wanting to share her intention with him. She was supposed to get permission from him to do so, but on the way, she stopped because of an anxious thought. The girl was a little hesitant, as she was not sure that she could enter Christian's room herself. Then she met the butler, who told her that the Marquis was currently resting in his office. When the Marquise learned of this, she asked William to tell him that she would soon be visiting her husband. The butler thought it would be a little doubtful if he informed the gentleman of his wife's visit every time. Therefore, he advised Hilary to go there herself because the Marquis no longer disliked her. The girl even felt a little embarrassed from forcing William to go back and forth with her requests. Nevertheless, she asked the butler to be patient a little longer, as the Marquis's condition was not yet quite good. The servant had no choice but to agree, and he went back to Christian. In fact, Hilary wanted to visit her husband every morning, at lunchtime and in the evening, to see her beloved face. Her heart just fluttered every time she met her husband and did not want to offend William. In the last few days, Hilary felt like the Marquis was looking at her with a peculiar look. However, she found him always cute, even when his expression was impolite. Entering the office, the girl immediately expressed her intention to visit the wife of the crown prince. At first, Christian thought that the princess herself called his wife, but she admitted that this was not the case. At the same time, she was sure that this could happen soon, since she had something to say to Julia. The Marquis didn't react much, though Hilary was expecting a little more at this moment. Looking at her husband, the girl thought that he no longer cared about Princess Julia at all. The Marquis only wondered why she had decided to disturb the butler for the sake of such news. Then Christian asked his wife not to resort to his services with such trifles, but to come in herself. After a short pause, the Marquis added that Hilary herself could come to him for any reason. This surprised the girl a little. She even assumed that her husband was looking at her as an ordinary commoner. Christian remembered how a few minutes ago the butler had come to him and announced his wife's arrival. He admitted that the girl did not dare to enter here herself yet, so she asked to notify in advance. The Marquis was reading a book at the time, but he looked up from what he was doing and invited Hilary in. William hesitated a little. Christian realized that he wanted to ask him something and asked what he wanted. Then the butler asked his permission that the Marquise could enter her husband's house without resorting to his help. The whole situation seemed a little strange to the master, because from the very beginning she burst into him without asking. And now the girl suddenly began to worry about it, and the Marquis thought that it was about the first meeting. The Marquis gave permission that his wife could enter without asking, but the butler asked the gentleman himself to tell her so. The Marquis's first thought was that it would make Hilary happy, but also very noisy. Therefore, when he met her, he allowed her to visit without early notice by the butler. But noticing her some embarrassment, I thought that the girl was not happy about this and might not agree. Christian even imagined that she was going to continue to harass the butler with warnings about the visit. Hilary stood in front of her husband and didn't dare to say anything back to him, as if she felt guilty. It even occurred to the girl that she began to bother William for the sake of her own comfort. Christian broke her silence and let her go if she had nothing else to do with him. Then Hilary pulled herself together again and confessed to the Marquis that she really wanted permission from him to do something else. The girl remembered a beautiful ring with a pink diamond and asked permission to wear it. Christian pondered because he did not know why his wife really needed this ring. Hilary also promised that she would return him as soon as she returned from the prince's palace. The girl also swore that she would be very careful with the jewelry and would not leave a scratch on it. The Marquise needed this ring only once, so she was going to wipe Julia's nose. Christian thought about it for a few more seconds and then refused his wife's request. The girl was somewhat shocked. She did not understand why he did this and thought that he was still hoping for the love of the princess. But the Marquis then added that he did not want to lend her this ring, but wanted her to wear it always. Then he reached into the drawer of the table, took out a box, and then handed the jewelry to his wife. The girl was sincerely surprised because earlier this ring meant a lot to the Marquis, but he only confirmed his words again. Christian resigned himself to the fact that he was never destined to be with the one he loved so much, so he believed that the ring no longer had a mistress. This diamond was matched to the princess's pale pink hair as a wedding gift. At that time, Christian chose this jewelry with a soul, but he never had the opportunity to give it as a gift. And Hilary now gladly accepted this jewelry and sincerely thanked her husband for such beauty. Then the girl promised that she would not bother him anymore and was about to leave his office. The Marquis noticed that Hilary had an expression on her face as if she was going to kill someone. But he had no intention of interfering in her affairs at all and trusted her completely, so he only wished her good luck. After visiting the Marquis, Hilary immediately wanted to send a letter to the princess through the butler asking for an audience. But then she remembered that William already had enough to worry about, so she decided that she would do it herself. It seemed that this was all Julia was waiting for, since the answer came to her almost immediately. Hilary, meanwhile, reflected on how she had come back of her own free will and was now perfectly prepared. The girl has well-prepared information that will help her finish off Prince John with one shot. She had even received a pink diamond ring from Christian to rebuke Julia. In addition, Hilary was very pleased that the Marquis had given her this jewelry for good and often admired it. Although at the moment of receiving the gift, the Marquise considered the situation awkward, so she could not feel much joy at first. But this was the first gift from her loved one, and now she didn't care that it had previously been a gift for the princess. It was important to the Marquise now that her husband had personally given her the ring, and she hoped that he had already given up his feelings for Julia. Soon Hilary arrived in all her glory at the palace and was greeted by the princess. The Marquise noticed that Julia's face was slightly distorted at the sight of her, and she knew that her plan was beginning to work. However, the girl still politely thanked the prince's wife for allowing her to visit her. But the princess was just very interested in why the Marquise decided to see her. Hilary again noticed that Julia was already accustomed to treating people with disdain and had taken root in the place of the prince's wife. To her, the Marquise confessed that she only wanted to assure her of her good attitude towards Her Majesty. As she did so, Hilary casually touched her face so that the ring flashed before Julia's eyes. This had an effect, and the princess's face immediately changed, although she tried not to show her feelings. Julia recognized this jewelry for sure, in which the Marquis had put all his heart, because it was impossible to forget. Hilary was still waiting for the princess's reaction, but she suddenly smiled sweetly in response. For a moment, the Marquise even thought that she did not recognize this ring, and she was extremely upset, but she did not give up. While the girls continued their conversation over tea, Hilary continued to watch the princess's facial expressions. And soon she realized that Julia had definitely recognized this ring and was now only pretending not to give herself away. The Marquise also realized that Julia was now even more afraid of her than before, but she was not going to give in. Hilary then took out a small envelope and asked if the princess was convinced of her special ability. The Marquise believed that it would be better used for the good of the country, so she wrote down what needed to be prepared for the future. At the same time, Hilary did not stop showing the jewelry in front of the princess's face to show her superiority. For the prince, she had prepared something separately, and it was about the boundaries that belonged to the old duchy. The Marquise explained that bandits had appeared in that area, but in fact they were not bandits at all. She described them as enemy troops who had come to test the Empire's defenses. Hilary remembered that in the previous version, John had a lot of problems because of this, because he realized the situation too late. Then it happened because the Crown Prince had to fight in the conflict with the enemy only on his own. He desperately tried to prevent the conflict from escalating into war and made an agreement with them. It contained one condition, according to which foreign merchants would conduct their business in the territory of the Empire free of charge. This was discussed for a long time among the people, as well as the fact that Christian was an outstanding diplomat and could have achieved more favorable terms. But the Marquis was not up to it at that time, and he did not go to these negotiations with the prince. Julia wondered why the Marquise had decided to address this to her, and not to John himself. The princess believed that if she was worried about the Empire, it would be better to inform the prince immediately. And then Hilary asked about the next tea party that His Majesty would hold. Julia considered such a question too bold since it was a very delicate matter. The Marquise realized that the training with Madame was not in vain, because now she could know what the princess was thinking. Hilary immediately made a face of amazement and began to apologize for not yet having enough knowledge of etiquette. She also explained that she had brought a useful prophecy and thought that it would be easier for Julia to tell about it. At the same time, the Marquise thought that perhaps it would be worthwhile not to ask about it, if she had a conscience. The princess did realize that the information about the tea party was not significant compared to what she had received from Hilary, and then she added that she would arrange an appointment in the near future. But for now, she had nothing more to say. However, Julia promised that as soon as she made her decision, she would immediately send the Marquise a letter notifying her. The princess also decided not to punish Hilary for her impolite behavior this time. She again arrogantly repeated to the guest that she was the crown princess of this country, and it was necessary to follow the rules. The Marquise promised that she would try not to make such a mistake again, and hastened to take her leave. At the same time, Hilary understood that everyone's favorite saint from the novel was no longer in this world. And yet the Marquise could not restrain herself, and during her bow, put her hand again so that the ring flashed in front of the princess. Julia again felt that inside her it was very catchy, and this time she could not stand it. The princess wondered where Hilary got this ring, suggesting that it was given to him by Christian. The girl, glad that she had finally noticed, proudly said that her husband had given her this wonderful jewelry. Then she began to boast of how pleased she was with this gift, and did not understand at all when the Marquise had time to prepare it for her. Hilary saw the princess's desire to declare that this ring actually belonged to her, and she was so pleased to look at Julia's hesitant expression, knowing that she had only just begun her plan. According to this plan, the princess must bite the bait with a ring in which there is a pink diamond. But for now, Hilary continued to say innocently that she did not expect such generosity from her husband at all. She also had no idea how rare this stone was, and that the Marquis had managed to give it to a jeweler for processing. This decoration was thought out to the smallest detail, and it seemed that Christian had prepared it in advance. At this time, Hilary waited for the princess to lose control of her face so that she could read her mind. At the same time, she was glad that she could not read her mind, but noticed that Julia turned pale. The Marquise then suggested aloud that this ornament was not magnificent enough for the eyes of the princess. Julia began to deny it because it was just beautiful, and she stammered a lot. Hilary, meanwhile, continued to press her opponent, saying that it was the first time she had seen a pink diamond, and now she simply could not imagine how she had lived before, not knowing about such beauty. Hilary continued to play her part and defiantly put her hand with the ring in front of the princess's head. Turning the jewelry a little, she expressed that the diamond was very suitable for the color of Her Majesty's hair. At the same time, the Marquise did not take her eyes off the way Julia's complexion changed, as if she was about to faint. And only at the moment when the princess's face had already acquired a greenish tint, Hilary began the next step. She immediately feigned fright on her face, as if she had guessed the cruelest truth. Then she expressed her assumption that she understood who the ring was really intended for. Julia could not yet utter a word, and the Marquise wondered why she had not yet reacted. Hilary even thought that the princess actually wanted to see her happy and unsuspecting. The Marquise could not understand why the princess was still holding on, as if she wanted to endure to the end. Then the girl, with a sad face, almost crying, repeated again that she had no idea who the owner of the ring really was. Then the princess came out of her stupor and began to console the Marquise that she was not to blame for anything. At the same time, Julia preferred to remain in the dark and did not understand why Hilary told her such a cruel fact. Until then, the princess's life had remained smooth, although there had been some conflicts and incidents. But still she remained a saint and tried to always behave correctly. And although this time she was made out to be a villain, she apologized to the Marquise, since she still had a conscience. Hilary in turn began to apologize because thanks to her she rediscovered her limits. Julia still insisted that she was the one to express gratitude for the fact that the Marquise had saved Christian's life. The Marquise explained that she was able to help a loved one thanks to her abilities, and now she will protect him forever. At the same time, Hilary noticed a rather strange expression on the princess's face, as if she was silently threatening her and Christian. However, she squeezed out the best wishes and then abruptly stood up, as if she was going to leave quickly. Hilary realized that all of this had hit Julia harder than expected, but she was glad of the result. Soon the Marquise returned home, where she was greeted again by the butler, who realized that her meeting had been successful. The girl confirmed that everything went very well and fruitfully, and also asked how the Marquis was today. William said that the gentleman had been strolling in the garden in the morning, and then went to his office and has been resting there ever since. Hilary suggested that the butler buy more of the novels that Christian loves to read when he is upset. The butler was only surprised again at how many details this girl actually knew. And then he asked what the Marquise was doing for the rest of the day, and she wanted to visit her husband first. She had told him that morning that she wanted to go to the palace, and now she wanted to tell him how it had gone. Now she was in a great hurry to see the Marquis, and as soon as she entered his study, he immediately asked how Julia was doing. The girl noticed that his mood today was a little different, and she wanted to hear right now what it was all about. But Christian went on to say that the Marquise could see the future, and asked if she saw the princess happy. Hilary didn't quite understand why her husband would suddenly ask such a question, but he had a slightly interested look. But she couldn't answer that right now, as she knew that Julia would soon lose her healing ability. The Marquise remembered that after His Highness had left this world, the couple's relationship was no longer so sensual. The whole empire regretted that it had lost such a talented person, and the crisis began to shake the country again. It was in this situation that Princess Julia lost her divine healing power. The reason for this was unknown, but at the same time Julia lost her status as an untouchable saint. After that, she was only a beautiful girl with a kind heart, but nothing more, and the environment quickly turned away from her. And the crown prince began to get very tired of diverse political issues, so he could not pay attention to his wife. Perhaps the situation could have been better if they had had a child, but Hilary hadn't thought about that until she was resurrected. And now, standing in front of the Marquis, the girl tried to find the right words, realizing that Julia's future would not be bright. Hilary also knew that if she lied, it would eventually become known, and decided to pretend she didn't know. After all, if she told her husband the whole truth, the Marquise was afraid that he might return to that girl again. But then Christian seemed to read her mind, and began to assure her that he no longer had any feelings for Julia. And now she did not understand, if so, then why he had asked about her at all. Also, the emotion on his face completely betrayed him, but Hilary loved him very much and just couldn't lose him. Therefore, she decided that it was not worth hiding the truth from him, and at least a little hesitated, she nevertheless confessed. Hilary revealed that Princess Julia would soon lose her ability to heal. Such words led the Marquis into some bewilderment. He did not understand how this could happen. The girl also did not want her husband to start thinking a lot about the princess again, and decided to tell something else. With a deep seal on her face, Hilary told him that she herself would soon lose her ability. The girl assured that she did not know for what reason all this would happen, as well as that after that she did not see anything. Christian understood her words to mean that the loss of her powers could only happen if she died. But the girl was not sure about this because there is also an option that she will survive and just live like an ordinary person. Therefore, before all this happened, the Marquise wanted to have time to complete all the planned affairs. At the moment, Hilary did not care about death, because so far her abilities have not gone anywhere. Christian then wondered when exactly what she had told him would happen. The girl admitted that it would be in about a year, and also that Julia would be healthy for the rest of her life. After that, Hilary noticed that the Marquis was no longer interested in anything, not even the health of the princess. She wanted to add something else to him, but Christian asked him to be left alone. As she left the study, the girl thought that she had said something wrong and feared that the Marquis would make a bad choice again. At that moment, she really wanted to have a talent to be able to take care of and comfort someone. After a while, Madame Elizabeth came to the Marquise and noticed that her student was in a rather gloomy mood. After that last conversation with her husband, the girl could not sleep normally and did not feel well. Christian himself did not show himself either, and there was no answer from the princess, and all this worried her. Elizabeth began to guess what the girl's condition was because of a visit to the crown prince's wife. But no matter how upset Hilary was, she had to follow the plan, and she turned on the actress mode again. The girl said that she was very worried when she went to the audience and put on a ring given by the Marquise. There she learned that Christian wanted to give this ring to the princess when she was not yet married. As soon as Julia saw this jewelry, she immediately recognized it, and this news shocked Elizabeth. Hilary also felt that there were some things that were better not to know, and she wished that His Highness would be a little more attentive to her. Elizabeth was very worried about her student, and now she herself should calm down. But her reaction still seemed weak to the Marquise, and she admitted that she was actually very anxious. The girl shared her fears that now the crown prince's wife would try to separate her from the Marquise. Hilary then lowered her head and sought advice from her mentor, who had always supported her husband. But Elizabeth began to assure the girl that the prince's wife would not do this because she had always been kind to everyone. Madame believed that the princess would never do such a thing, and believed that Hilary had misunderstood everything that day. And if this is the case, then Elizabeth will request an audience and talk to Julia in person. Madame was so upset that the Marquise had to calm her down, and when she had finished, she let her go. After that, Hilary felt very exhausted and decided to take a walk in the garden for a while. Suddenly, she heard Christian's voice behind her, who came up to her with a small bouquet of flowers. The girl was quite shocked, but not so much because of the flowers, but because of his high spirits. A few minutes ago, he had been spending time in the gazebo, and the butler was beside him. William was well aware that after the arrival of the mistress, the Marquis's condition had noticeably improved. But the butler did not want him to spend all his time within four walls and suggest that the master take up some hobby. He decided to take up floristry, and William brought him many more different flowers for this. Still, what he had already brought was not enough for the butler, and he went to get the next portion. Although the Marquis was quite satisfied with these flowers, and this was not what he wanted to talk to William about. It was just news from the prince, who managed to avert the crisis thanks to information from Hilary. And Christian was very pleased that her abilities were so great that she could determine the fate of the country. Besides, she had saved him, and while he was thinking about it, he noticed the Marquise not far away. Then he remembered how she had said that her abilities would soon disappear too, and also that she wants to have time to implement all her plans, and he decided to talk to her. Taking the bouquet, which he managed to figure out, Christian went to meet his wife. The girl could not believe that the Marquis had decided to give her a bouquet of flowers and did not know what to think now. Christian, handing over the flowers, wanted to say something to his wife while speaking in a pleasant voice. And at that moment, the most absurd thoughts began to creep into Hilary's head, but she tried to control herself. The Marquis noticed a thoughtful look and thought that she did not like such flowers, but nevertheless decided to give them to her. Paying full attention to his wife again, he handed her the bouquet, as if he did not want to refuse. At the same time, Christian miscalculated a little of his strength and poked the flowers at the girl so that he almost pushed her. The butler noticed this and immediately rushed to the lady with anxiety, and the Marquis reported that he only wanted to talk. William, when he returned, did not understand where the gentleman had gone during his floristry, and so he went to look for him. Hilary was a little surprised that her husband was doing this, and at this time he decided that it was worth talking to her later. But the girl interrupted him and insisted that they talk now, and that everything was fine with her. The men, however, were worried about her condition, and the Marquis made the final decision to talk to her another time. Then Hilary decided to go and make arrangements for dinner, but after that she was going to return to her husband. And a little later, when she entered the room, she noticed a wonderful bouquet of smelling white roses on the table. The girl was delighted, but not so much from the flowers, but from the fact that her beloved can do so many things. At the same time, the girl had never seen the Marquis make bouquets before, and there was no such thing in the original novel. Christian, who was nearby, noticed that Hilary was very pleased at first, but suddenly frowned for some reason. At this time, the girl noticed out of the corner of her eye that her husband was smiling for a moment, and she even turned to check. The Marquis had already regained his expression, but Hilary was sure he was smiling. At the same time, the girl was still pleased that their conversation ended on a pleasant note and with a good mood. Then Christian went up to his wife again and said again that he wanted to tell her something. The girl even shuddered at how pleasant his voice was to her, although he himself thought that she was frightened. But despite this, Christian continued and asked her the question that had already been asked earlier. He wanted to know why she had chosen him, and Hilary didn't understand why the Marquis was coming back to the matter. It seemed to the girl that her husband began to guess that she intended to avenge him. Hilary was very worried that she might be found out, and even her face changed a little. Then she pulled herself together to answer, and even began to say that he was her favorite. The Marquis at this moment assumed that she was just seeing him as a very important person in the future. Suddenly they both froze in place as if they did not understand each other's words, especially the Marquis. He was very interested in why she called him such a word that he had heard for the first time. Hilary continued to stand a little in a stupor for now, but at the same time tried to find the right words. She even reproached herself a little for letting it slip, that now she had to explain it somehow. Christian assumed that it was some kind of foreign language, but even he had not heard of it and thought it was an ancient language. The girl did not understand why the Marquis was so attached to this word, because in the original he was a learned character. Then Hilary explained to him how it is and that this word means the most beloved person. Christian was even a little confused by this because he knew perfectly well what love meant, but it did him little good. The girl noticed this and clarified that it rather means a warm affection for the one you are protecting. The Marquis now understood much better, and he confessed to her that he did not know that she loved flowers so much. After that, Christian promised his wife to send her even more flowers to make her happy. The Marquis had simply decided that his wife was very fond of flowers, but that was not what he wanted to talk to her about now. He began by thinking about her abilities again, and Hilary thought that he was still doubting them. But the Marquis came to the conclusion that the future she predicted had not yet arrived. And if by that time it is possible to change the present, then the future will change accordingly. Hilary could not understand why the Marquis had such thoughts, but she decided to listen to him to the end. Christian continued, remembering the day she had saved him, and that otherwise he would have been dead by now. The Marquis explained that by doing so, she had influenced the future, and now it would follow a different scenario. The girl still did not understand where it was leading, but at the same time she could not stop admiring it. Christian has heard from John about the border area, but his survival has nothing to do with this provocation. He then asked the girl to predict this part more accurately, as well as the moments surrounding his death. It seemed to Hilary that she had heard these words somewhere before, and it reminded her of a time paradox. Now the border area issue is proceeding as it was before the resurrection, but there is no guarantee that the same thing will happen again. And the girl feared that if what she predicted did not happen, then her lies would be exposed sooner than she hoped. The Marquis, meanwhile, assumed that Hilary had seen a very important event in the future for which he was needed. He was sure that it was for this reason that she had saved him, and the girl remembered that he had already said this not long ago. At the same time, she remembered that in the original he died soon after, so no events related to him would happen. At that point, Hilary simply assumed that it would be much better if Christian had survived. She remained silent, and the Marquis thought it was difficult for the girl to talk about it, but he wanted to know the truth. It was really hard for Hilary to speak, because today he was sitting so close to her and so persistent. But then she did admit that the Marquis would not have died but had survived, and she did not think that the future would change, and also that the world would continue to live as it did without her. And the Marquis agreed with these words of his wife. Then he added sadly that regardless of whether he was there or not, the planet still continued to rotate. He also admitted that he is not such a great person whose existence can change the future. Hilary was upset by such words, and by the fact that the Marquis was again in a depressive state. At the same time, she understood that he was only a secondary character who hung like dust under her feet, and that as long as there are a couple of main characters in this world, Christian will never become the center of the world. Suddenly the girl cried out that the Marquis did not need to change the world in order to be great. She added that Christian only needs to become the meaning of life for one person, and if he can change this person, then this will mean that he is great in this world. The Marquis still didn't understand the point, because he didn't think anyone needed him, but Hilary explained it to him again. Now she said that she was the one who needed him, and that he was her favorite, not flowers. At this moment, the butler suddenly appeared in front of them, trying to understand what they were doing here. This greatly infuriated Hilary, but William immediately explained that he had come to report that dinner was ready. The girl also continued to reproach herself for dropping this word from her lips again, although everything was almost gone. At this time, Christian only began to laugh as if he had been told a very funny joke. The Marquise and the butler could not understand what was happening to the master, but at the same time they were very glad that he was laughing. Hilary especially drew the filming to the laughter of Christian, which she already knew for sure. In the original novel, he only laughed so much when he was around Princess Julia. For a moment, the girl even thought that she had made herself look stupid in front of him, but this did not upset her at all. Then the Marquis went to the butler with one small request, but it was important to him now. While William was fully attentive, Christian asked a servant to provide them with a pleasant dinner. Then the men went about their business and Hilary went to her room to get ready for dinner. But all the time, she was very much troubled by the fact that the Marquis had addressed the butler with a request and not with an ordinary order. For some reason, it hurt her so much that she could not even concentrate on the food and appreciate its taste. In any case, she was pleased to see Christian from different angles. She especially liked that he was smiling. After dinner, the girl hoped to get a good night's sleep, wrapped in a fluffy blanket. When she reached her room and opened the door, she was pleasantly surprised. Hilary couldn't believe her eyes because the whole room was lined with flowers. The Marquise could not understand what all this meant, and then suddenly she noticed a beautiful bouquet. It was the bouquet that Christian had prepared for her, and now it was on the table by the bed. The girl remembered the Marquise's words, how he had promised to send her more flowers, and now she understood what he had asked the butler for. However, the girl guessed that the Marquis definitely did not ask to bring such an amount, and all this was too much from William. But even though the room looked like a garden now, Hilary was pleased. And Christian at that time was in his office and remembered the conversation with his wife, especially the word favorite. The next day, the Marquise decided to write a letter about the current situation and soon coped with it. She never received an answer from Julia, nor could she get in touch with the Countess. Hilary was going to send this letter today, and now she needed to find the butler. The girl just tried to sort out all these flowers herself, but there were too many of them. The Marquise went to William's office to ask him for help, but when she entered, she did not see him. It even seemed strange to her, because the maid had said that he should be here, but only piles of papers were visible. Immediately, Hilary heard the faint voice of the butler trying to greet her. Throwing all the papers on the floor, the girl saw William lying on the table who looked very weak. He muttered that the Marquise should take care of his master, and she began to shake him so that he would come to his senses. Hilary realized that this had happened to him because he usually slept less than 3 hours a night. William was embarrassed that his mistress saw him like this, and she, in turn, was angry that there were no labor laws in this world. The butler then explained that he had to work on behalf of the master because he was unable to take care of his own affairs. The girl still found this situation strange, because until yesterday everything was fine with William. He was really busy with the Marquise's business, but only urgent ones, and not so that he slept only 3 hours a day. Then he admitted that he could count on his fingers the moments when the owner laughed before he became depressed. And now the butler was glad that the lady had made him laugh, and believed that this lady was in command of the Marquis. Then William suddenly fell silent, and the lady began to stir him up again, looking at him a little suspiciously. The butler then began to ask the Marquise to take care of the housekeeping of the estate, but she was only a formal wife. Moreover, Hilary has never done anything like this before and does not know what to do with all this. William promised to teach her everything, but the girl was sure that the Marquis would never allow this, and the butler decided that he would ask his master for permission to do so, although Hilary had doubts. Then the girl wanted to know where her husband was now, and found out that he was on the terrace. William explained that the gentleman was also engaged in his hobby today and also arranged a tea ceremony there. By the time he finished his last words, Hilary had already left his office and gone to her husband. She came to him a little agitated, and he sat quietly and prepared to drink tea. At the same time, he asked what bothered his wife so much in the morning that she was out of breath. The girl explained that she had a very urgent matter, so she had to run to the Marquis. Christian noticed that running was good for you, and then he suggested that she have tea with him again. This distracted Hilary a little from the rest of her thoughts, because she definitely did not expect that her beloved would pour her tea. And while the Marquis was wielding a teapot to serve his wife, she tried to tell him something. However, the girl was really very out of breath while she was running, and it was difficult for her to say everything at once. Of course, Hilary did not want to refuse the tea offered to her beloved, but she had an urgent matter. The Marquis agreed, especially as he himself wanted to talk to her and invited her to sit down. He also realized that the Marquise was not thirsty and put the cups in their place, and she now reproached herself for her hasty refusal. Then Christian asked why Hillary was looking for him, and she still did not dare to start her request. The girl also noticed his mood, as well as that his gaze softened when he looked at her. But then I realized that I was a little mistaken and thought that it was because of yesterday, as well as because of the word favorite. Only it still seemed better to her than when he had eyes like an old man's. While Hillary was thinking about this, the Marquis asked her again the reason for her early and urgent visit. Then the girl confessed that the butler asked her to take care of the estate and conduct business. She explained that he had a lot of work to do and it was now difficult for him to cope alone. Hillary also said that it was not easy for the butler to ask her to do this, especially since she is only a fictitious wife. The Marquis could not entrust anyone with the work before, because he wanted everything to be done as it should be. But now he realized that while doing all this, he was not really living, and as he wanted. Hillary smiled at him because she wanted to lighten his load, so she was hurt by William's request. For a moment there was silence between them, which was even pleasant for both of them. The Marquis was thinking about his answer at that moment because he no longer doubted his wife. He allowed her to take care of their internal affairs, especially since she was aware of his thoughts. At the same time, Christian himself was going to say something to his wife and then handed her an envelope from the prince. Hillary began to look curiously, not understanding what he needed from the Marquis again. But when she opened the letter, she realized that the letter was intended for her, and there John asked her to meet. The girl realized that her abilities were in demand in the situation of the borderlands, and now the prince needed help. However, she wanted to use her gift only for Christian's sake and thought of refusing John's request. Still, she decided to ask her husband for advice, and he, in turn, did not understand why she was asking him. Hillary was worried that bad rumors might spread because of the upcoming secret meeting with the prince. The Marquis only smiled at this, for he could not help but find out about the secret meeting, and this frightened the girl a little. At the same time, she did not want to do anything without Christian's knowledge, and the thought of the opposite even angered her. In addition, she really doesn't like the idea even if she brings 100 people to the meeting. At that moment, the Marquis remembered how Julia had once confessed to him that she liked John and had broken her heart with it. Then he turned his attention back to Hillary and realized that this girl was completely different. Still, he advised to meet with the prince because he is persistent and in case of refusal he will call again and again. Then he asked Hillary not to call him the Marquis all the time because no one calls her the Marquis's wife. Christian leaned closer to his wife as if no one else would hear and asked her to call him by name. The girl, of course, dreamed of this but did not expect it, and now she quietly pronounced his name aloud. She liked it so much that she could not resist simply shouting his name, but then immediately pulled herself together. However, she felt a little embarrassed and, wishing her husband a happy day, hurried to leave. At that moment, Christian noticed that she had knocked over a cup of tea, but it didn't bother him at all. Hillary felt herself burning with shame and raced past the butler, nearly knocking him down. After a while, the prince came to their house and carefully examined the Marquise's room. But she believed that her room was not a museum, so it was not worth considering it that way. A little earlier, she wrote to the prince that she agreed to meet, and he expressed a desire to come to their home. He also arrived under the name Harold, and they decided to meet him directly in the room, and not in the open living room. This man was not a character who strictly followed the rules of the novel, so Hillary hoped that everything would be fine. The girl could not understand why the prince was so attentive to her room, because even the Marquis had not been there yet. Meanwhile, John noticed the papers on the table and realized that the Marquis was busy with Christian's internal affairs. The girl explained that her husband gave her permission a few days ago, and she would figure everything out herself. The prince began to look at the papers and noticed that everything was set out in such a way that it could be understood at a glance. He also realized that the more he got to know this girl, the more he discovered amazing talents in her. At this time, Hillary kindly offered the guest tea and invited him to sit down at the tea table. John was silent for a moment, and then began to say that all this was in the name of a great empire. Not quite understanding what he meant, the girl stared at him even more attentively and almost poured too much tea. The prince explained that the prophecy about the situation at the border had been very helpful, and now he asked her to tell her directly. John then clarified that the Marquise had previously expressed a desire to use her ability for the good of the country. The girl decided to refuse him in a polite way and also promised to pretend that she had not heard any of this. She explained that her husband's health had not yet recovered, and that for now she wanted to focus on him and on running the business. The prince did not understand why domestic affairs were more important to her than the problems of the country, but the Marquise's foresight did not concern state affairs. Hillary clarified that she can only foresee quite important events from time to time. Now John did not understand why she had informed him about the border area, because it was not like doing household chores. But the girl was only interested in the date of the tea party, and as compensation she shared the information. This made the prince a little angry, and he wondered why she wasn't afraid of him, but she was technically having a meeting with Harold. John also considered it selfish that the marquise was going to use her gift only for personal purposes. But the girl did not see anything special in this, she just put her husband in the first place. She then clarified that while the prince and princess were worried about their happiness, the marquise was thinking about the friend they had left alone. This hooked John, and the girl hoped that he would not throw out any more nonsense. At the same time, the prince was thinking about how to seize the initiative again because she did not reach into her pocket for a word. Suddenly, John choked and began to cough violently, and Hilary began to assure that everything was fine with the tea and that she had grown it herself. The prince continued to cough for some time, and the girl thought that something was really wrong with him. Then he explained that the tea tasted exactly the same as Julia brewed it. The fact is that although the princess was pretty, she always brewed absolutely tasteless tea. This angered the marquise because the prince dared to express that her drink tasted like water from a mop. The girl did not believe that this tea could be tasteless, although she brewed it from the same tea leaves. The marquise decided to try it herself and drank a sip, which she immediately regretted, because there was no taste at all. At this point, the prince assumed that the conversation was over, and suggested that he proceed to the point, asking what the marquise wanted. Without hesitation, the girl demanded the land of the late Duke Oliver, as well as to raise the status of her husband's title. The first demand will symbolize that Hilary has become the opposite of Julia, taking the legacy of the dead Caroline. And the second is to prove that Christian is not to blame for what he did in Julia's name, namely the death of Oliver's daughter. The prince could not answer this question for her now, since the final decision was made by the emperor. But these were the only requirements the marquise had for a deal in exchange for the use of her abilities. Hilary already knew that the prince could not accept such conditions on her own, and she offered something else. If John promised to do so in writing, she would help, and if she needed it urgently, John would immediately fulfill her request. The crown prince thought for a while and then agreed to the terms of the marquise and promised that she would receive the documents in the near future. The girl was pleased with this end of the meeting, and John hurried to leave their house. At the same time, the prince wanted her ability so much that he accepted all the conditions even without clarification. But he could also just hope that Hilary couldn't find an excuse to return the favor. And as long as John looked down on the marquise, she had the opportunity to elevate Christian to the heavens of this empire. The next day, Hilary received a letter from Princess Julia with the date of the tea party, although she was waiting for documents from the prince. The marquise immediately packed up and went to visit Pamela, and she thought that the prince was very touched by her loyalty. Hilary was the first to break the news to the countess, because she believed that promises should be kept. The girl thought the letter would take a long time. Besides, a personal conversation makes more of an impression. With a personal visit, the marquise conquered the countess in a good way, and she was pleasantly surprised. Pamela also asked if the princess had said anything else important in the letter. Hilary admitted that Julia was going to invite some noble ladies to a meeting one day. Because of her character, the princess did not want to hold such luxurious meetings often, and Pamela understood that it would be difficult for her. The countess also assumed that Julia would ask Madame Elizabeth for help and was not delighted with this. She simply did not like the presence in the secular world of a madame who had the same power of influence, and her neutral position in the original meant that she was very hurt by the presence of the madam next to her. But the fact that Pamela had invited the marquise to her place meant that she liked her, and Hilary decided to take advantage of it. She understood that Julia had been a simple girl as long as she was a saint, so Madame had given her lessons. At the same time, Hilary pretended that she could not understand why Elizabeth was helping her at such an important event. The girl even suggested that the princess simply did not know how gorgeous the countess was. Pamela thought for a while at first and then admitted that she actually thinks so too. Hilary then suggested that nobles, including her and the countess, would have a hard time gaining the princess's trust due to last year's flooding. But the king's prerogative was to take care of the citizens, and the interference of the nobles could create useless conflicts. Due to the flooding, the province was badly damaged, and Julia was shocked by the cruelty of the locals. She appealed for help to the aristocrats who came to the temple, but the king was busy hiding his tragic internal affairs. In such a situation, other nobles could not do anything, because they had no right to interfere in the affairs of foreign territories. And in the end, only John and Christian listened to Julia's call, and from that moment on, the prince's love with her grew stronger. Christian could only draw up the documents instead of the crown prince cleaning up after him. Hilary then added that in any case His Majesty was very disappointed with the nobles at that time. The girl also offered to make a couple of loopholes in the walls of the castle, if the Countess only wanted it. In the upcoming tea party, the Marquise was going to create a situation where the wife of the crown prince would appear in an unfavorable light. At this moment, Pamela will have to intervene and help Julia with her talents. The princess is a very simple person, and in relationships she is guided only by high morality. And after the Countess helps her, Julia will open her soul to her quite easily. As she made her proposal, the Marquise noticed that Pamela was a little hesitant and might not agree. The Countess wondered why this girl was helping her, and she needed Pamela to become her guardian in the secular world. The aristocrat still lingered, but she promised the Marquise to think about this proposal. When she returned home, Hilary remembered this meeting and did not understand why the Countess had been hesitating for so long. She also received a letter from Prince John about the appointment, as well as an imperial pass. The girl found this answer quite fast, which meant that the prince really needed her talent very urgently. And if this happens, Hilary also needs to take advantage of the privilege and first decided to find out how Julia's training is going. The Marquise again dug into her diary in search of information and very soon found something that seemed very suitable to her. The very next day, the girl wanted to go to meet the prince. But before that, she was going to inform Christian. But the morning turned out to be not as she imagined, and she went to the palace with her husband. The day before, the Marquis had asked his wife if she was going to go to the palace again, and she answered positively. And then she saw something very beautiful, and she could not believe that her husband was doing this. Christian decided to go a little further, and now he cut a magnificent figure out of the bush with garden shears. Then the Marquis reminded his wife again that she should not report to him, but the girl still wanted to inform him of the trip. Hilary also didn't want it to turn out to be a secret between her and the crown prince and create an awkward situation. But the Marquis would not hear anything, and the girl decided that he did not want to know anything connected with John and Julia. She obediently agreed with his wish while calling her husband Mr. Christian. This seemed a little strange to the Marquis, and he asked his wife not to call him that, but simply by his first name. Then he even clarified to the girl that there was no need to add the word master when addressing him. And although the Marquise was wildly embarrassed by this, and it was difficult for her to address him simply by his first name, she nevertheless agreed. The girl even tried to immediately pronounce his name aloud, but she could only stammer. And then she did speak, her cheeks turning crimson, but Christian was pleased. The Marquis, having achieved his goal, began to cut the bush again, and Hilary now did not know what to do with herself. Christian then asked what her first prediction was going to give John. The girl hesitated a little and then said in a low voice that His Majesty would soon fall. Before the resurrection, I knew about such a case. Then the emperor, who was in good health, suddenly lost consciousness. The cause and origin of the disease were not clear, and Julia poured out her healing powers on him day after day. And this was the last time the princess was able to summon her divine powers. Then the Marquis asked if his wife would be able to save His Majesty by this prediction. The girl did not guarantee, but assumed that it could be prevented, but it was better to be prepared for any outcome. Christian later thought that he had lost his parents early, since he was very devoted to the emperor along with John. The Marquis was like his own son to His Majesty, and he was simply delighted with this boy. At the same time, John also doted on him, and believed that it was better to tell him some things first. And then the Marquis confessed to his wife that he was also going to visit the castle, which shocked her a little at that moment. Now that they were on their way to the palace together, Hilary didn't know if she should let her husband in. She was worried that he might meet Julia there, and the Marquis had just stabilized. Hilary didn't know what she would do if her husband suddenly lost consciousness, and Christian noticed her worries. And then the Marquis again seemed to read his wife's thoughts and asked if she cared if he had feelings for Julia again. The girl wanted to object, but Christian interrupted her and assured her that she should not worry about this. He was going solely to check on the emperor's condition and hoped that he would not meet the princess. The Marquise wanted to support her husband and offered to do the right thing if he got tired of forcing himself to forget. Hilary also promised that she would stay with him anyway, so that he wouldn't repeat the horrible future she saw. She asked him to do whatever his soul desired, whether it was love or hate. The girl explained this by the fact that in 2 years he would end all relations with her anyway. Hilary's goal was only to make the princess feel sorry and that Christian would no longer have anything to do with them. The Marquis then proposed to return home separately as soon as they had finished their business and not to wait for each other. Then the girl was worried again because he could fall exhausted, and she might not be there at that moment. But Christian wasn't that weak, and he knew how to deal with it. As a result, they decided to act separately, but Hilary still continued to worry about her husband. She still had to talk to the prince, so she went to him, but then suddenly stopped. After all, what the Marquise was doing now was very similar to Christian from the original novel. And then the girl heard the servant whispering that there had not been such a large-scale tea party for a long time. Hilary crept closer and overheard them mean Princess Julia's tea party. The maids also discussed that very young girls would not be invited this time due to the prince's stubbornness. And now they are going to invite girls who are responsible for the internal affairs of families. The maids also mentioned Julia's quarrels with Madame Marion, and this pleased the Marquise a little. The girl thought that everything was going exactly as she wanted, and after listening a little more, she went home. It was a little surprising to John that the Marquise would decide to meet him first. The girl was a little upset by such prickly words with which the prince spoiled her whole mood. Then he wondered what the Marquise had foreseen that she had foreseen so soon. Hilary did not hesitate, and immediately gave out information that his father would soon collapse and would not even be able to lift a finger. Judging by the prince's face, it seemed that he was not at all affected by this, and at the same time he looked very handsome. John noticed that the Marquise was looking at her and reminded her that this was not decent, since she had a husband of her own. He even boldly suggested that the girl just likes to look at handsome men. But the girl now only saw that the prince really wasn't bothered by her news. She came closer and bluntly said that His Majesty the Emperor would soon fall. John explained his calmness about this because the doctor at the last examination did not reveal anything terrible. Hilary later added that she did not know the reason and the day when it would happen. She just saw this picture in the future. To prevent this, the Marquise advised that one of the members of the royal court be kept near the Emperor. But even with these measures, there is no guarantee that His Majesty will be able to avoid it. Now the prince was upset because Julia used her healing powers on the Emperor every night. Hilary remembered that the princess had used this miracle every night before His Majesty fell. But then everyone became convinced that every life has its term, even with the support of divine forces. Now that Hilary had told the prince everything she wanted, she decided to go to her husband. Suddenly, the king's butler entered the study and John ordered him to go to the Emperor at once. Then he was about to come himself and wanted to ask his wife to be sent, but the Marquise interrupted him. The prince was very surprised because Hilary herself had just advised to send Julia to His Majesty. The girl explained that right now her husband was in an audience with the Emperor and asked to let them leave first. After all, if he clashed with the prince, it could shake his emotional state. At this point, the butler intervened and reported that Lady Julia had already gone to the Emperor to have tea with him. She, the prince, and the Marquise immediately rushed there because they knew that the princess made tea herself. Hilary was more worried about her husband and did not want him to meet Julia there, and then something happened to him. Suddenly, John suggested that the cause of the fall could be poisoning and asked what the Marquise thought about it. The girl did not know what to answer him at that moment and only advised him to run faster. At this time, Julia was already bringing a tray of brewed tea and was glad that she would be able to chat with the Emperor. She healed him every night so she could see his face, but he was very tired, so he immediately fell asleep. However, a few meters away, the princess noticed a familiar figure next to the Emperor. Julia even paused and almost dropped the tray from her hands and only softly pronounced his name. Christian heard a voice that he was already trying to forget and turned in that direction, realizing that he had not imagined it. After a while, Hilary was standing in front of the Marquise, out of breath, and this made him angry. After all, he told her not to come here, but she disobeyed and came, and the prince followed her. The Marquise immediately began to report that she was very worried, while asking if he had already seen the princess. The prince only looked at his former friend with a smirk and wanted to say something to him, but did not have time. Christian grabbed his wife by the arm and dragged her with him to get out of the hall as soon as possible. The girl obediently followed him, but did not understand why he held her so tightly and did not let go. But at the same time, she did not even try to free herself, because she liked the fact that the Marquis concerned her. Behind her, Hilary heard the prince calling for his wife and immediately realized what was really happening. John stayed with his wife and began to demand an explanation from her about what was there, because he saw how sad her face was. The princess looked after Christian and could not even imagine what he felt at that moment. The Marquis was not far away and heard her words, but he did not turn around but continued on his way. Hilary looked at him and realized that her husband was now holding back his emotions with all his might and was glad that he was coping. Soon they were in the carriage, where Hilary dared to express her admiration for him aloud. But the Marquis objected because this girl did not know him at all, and her predictions were not able to see through people. So Christian wondered why she pretended to know everything, and Hilary was confused, not knowing what to say to him. She now had no choice but to apologize for her ridiculous act, with which she offended her husband. The Marquise made no reply, and all the way they rode in silence all the way to the house. In her room, Hilary reflected on the fact that she had done this so that Christian could vent his emotions. And she was also tormented by the question that perhaps she should have prevented her husband from going to the palace at all. On the other hand, no one could have known that it was today that Julia would decide to visit the emperor. And from that time on, even at home, the Marquis remained silent, and this greatly upset Hilary. She knew that William would take good care of him, and she could drink some wine for the time being. Still, the desire to go and make sure that everything was fine with him did not give her peace of mind, but she understood that it would be a mistake. The girl was also saddened that Christian's office was so close that she could see it from the balcony, but his heart was far away. Then she saw him come out onto the balcony and lean to him, and she thought she had imagined it. But then Hilary realized that the Marquis was really awake at such a late hour, and her heart sank. The girl again remembered the notes where Christian once again tried to lose his life, and this frightened her very much. She thought that the meeting with Julia had stirred up his wounds again and immediately rushed to save her beloved. Hilary could not believe that such a courageous man would dare to do such an act because of nonsense. On the way, she met a frightened butler, who was actually frightened by the Marquise's anxiety. Out of breath, the girl could not speak normally, but still made it clear to William that she cared about how the Marquis was now. He began to explain to the worried Hilary that his master had only gone out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. Realizing that she was only frightened in vain, the girl was able to breathe a sigh of relief, which she really only imagined. She immediately began to apologize and wanted to leave the office before the Marquis noticed her, but immediately heard his voice. Christian was glad to see the girl now, for he wanted to talk to her. Then he asked the butler to leave them and not to disturb them for a while over trifles. At this point, Hilary even felt a little uncomfortable and prayed in her mind that William would stay. But he could not disobey the order of his master and immediately prepared to leave the room. When he left, Hilary even turned to the door because she felt a little embarrassed by her action. But then she realized that the Marquis was completely calm now, and it didn't look like he was going to scold her. On the contrary, he came closer to the Marquise and confessed that he had a conversation with her. The girl turned to him, not knowing what to answer at that moment, and only swallowed the lump in her throat with difficulty. For a few seconds, Christian just stared silently, as if waiting for some sign from above, but in fact, he was choosing his words. The Marquis felt some guilt for what had happened during the day, and now he was about to apologize to the Marquise for it. He also admitted that he had been too harsh with her, and at that moment, Hilary was simply confused. Her heart just jumped out of her chest, but she tried to pull herself together and asked what his mood was like now. Christian said that before that he took a little nap and now feels much better. The Marquis also noticed that the girl was standing all the time, turning away from him, and asked why she was not looking at him. He then realized that Hilary had recently been drinking wine on the terrace and took a few steps back, not wanting to embarrass her. Then the girl realized that Christian had seen her after all, and then a very terrible thought came to her. After all, standing on the balcony, she relaxed a little and now realized that this man had noticed her ugly behavior. At this point, the Marquis called his wife again, and she prepared to apologize for not having behaved quite properly. But when she turned around, she saw that Christian had filled his glasses with wine and offered to drink with him. Hilary didn't know what to think. She even assumed that she had just fallen asleep and was only dreaming. It seemed simply unreal to her that she was drinking wine with her loved one late at night in his room. However, the girl understood that this was reality, and she tried to pull herself together so as not to look even more stupid in front of the Marquis. But at the same time, she did not want such an evening to end, and decided to spend it as pleasantly as possible. Hilary looked at her husband, who at that moment seemed very cute and handsome to her. At the same time, she understood how defenseless he really was, and she didn't want to lose him. For a moment, she even wished that she had her phone with her now, so that she could capture his image. And then the Marquise again found herself thinking too much about this man, because her first goal was to save him. At that moment, Christian noticed that his wife was flushed and worried about her well-being. It even seemed to him that she would lose consciousness right now, and even sat down closer to bring her to her senses in time. Hilary needed to change the atmosphere in the room so as not to burn with shame, and she began to ask the Marquis about the princess. The girl asked what the reaction of the Crown Prince's wife was when they met. The Marquis hesitated a little, and seeing this, Hilary did not insist that he answer. But Christian had nothing to hide, and he admitted that Julia was startled for a moment. Only this did not last long at all, and after that, the princess began to treat him as before. Julia was also a little surprised by such an unexpected meeting, because no one warned her that the Marquis would come to the palace. Christian himself then made it clear to her that he had not come to her, but to meet with the emperor. The princess then looked very innocent and suggested that in this case we should all drink tea together. And then Julia immediately turned to the emperor, wanting to start a relatively casual conversation. Yet Christian felt something that had taken away his peace again, and he could not stay there any longer. The Marquis went to the exit, where he bumped into the Marquise and John in the doorway as they ran in. Also, Christian could not understand where he had gone wrong, because Julia behaved with him as usual. The Marquis now knew very well that everything he had tried to do so far had been rejected. Christian couldn't understand why he had been blamed then, and why Hilary hadn't come sooner when he was having a very hard time. The Marquise listened to his story, but she could not yet understand why he felt bad even then, and who caused it. Now Christian continued to confess that he had wasted his life trying to get something. Hilary remembered again how in the novel, the Marquis loved the princess very much and was the happiest man before. She decided to console him and said that he did everything in the name of love and not a single one of his actions was useless. The Marquise knew now that Christian wanted to leave in his heart not the image of Julia, but the feelings he had experienced. Hilary also asked him not to deny that he knows how to love, and this is where his happiness lies. Christian himself understood that his soul was not cold, and therefore he believed that he also deserved love. This faith protected him from wounds when someone denied and humiliated his existence. At the same time, Hilary believed that many people with whom he almost did not see sincerely loved him. The Marquise believed that everything should go well, and now she was looking forward to his future. Christian took this as something she could see his future, but Hilary clarified again that she couldn't see what she wanted. At the same time, the girl was ready to do everything in her power to make her husband happy. At the same time, while talking, consoling her beloved, the girl did not notice how tightly she squeezed his hands. Feeling a little embarrassed by this, Hilary immediately let him go, and then decided that it was time for her to go to bed. As soon as she stood up, Christian suddenly stopped her, grabbing her hand again as if he was about to say something important. But still he did not dare and let the girl go so that she could go to her room. Before leaving, Hilary paused at the door and wished the Marquis good night. Christian, left alone, thought again about the feeling that had haunted him for so long. And the girl, passing along the corridor, could not forget how his hand trembled over hers, so she decided to leave his room. Hilary was well aware that the Marquis's feelings were now agitated, and she had to wait for him to calm down a little. She was going to talk to him a little later, but then things went so that for a while they could not meet. The girl wanted to do everything as quickly as possible, but she finished only late in the evening, when it was time to go to bed. The butler also noticed that the mistress had about 10 new ones for each task. At the same time, William also taught the Marquise how to manage her husband's lands, and showed her the entire household. Besides, there was a tea party at the princess's house ahead, and Hilary went back to Madame Elizabeth's lesson. But this did not seem enough to gain experience, and the Marquise also attended the social meetings of Countess Pamela. Once again, the girl only fell on the pillow in the evening and was sad that she did not see her husband at all because of work. The girl also needed to clarify everything before drinking tea in order to be prepared for unforeseen circumstances. Thinking about the tea party, it suddenly occurred to Hilary that she had forgotten about the most important things besides preparation. The next day the girl met Madame Elizabeth again, who, as usual, greeted her with pleasure. At the same time, Madame was a little surprised that the Marquise herself asked her for an unscheduled meeting, but she had serious business. And then she confessed to her tutor that she had absolutely nothing to wear to the upcoming tea party. All the tailors were busy at the moment because of the same event, and Hilary hoped that Madame would help her. Then the girl began to explain that she would go to see the princess, and at the same time she wanted to look as good as possible. Some idea occurred to the Marquise, so she brought something with her and wanted to ask Madame's advice. She, in turn, advised that you can just slightly alter another dress if there is no time to sew a new one. Hilary knew that this was the best idea at the moment because she had thought about it herself. In addition, the girl was concerned about what was said about her and her origin, and she decided to show her real image. The Marquise decided that when she did so, everyone would look not at her status, but at herself. Madame Elizabeth was a little surprised at the idea, but saw a deep meaning in it and apologized for her doubts. And then Hilary reminded her that not long ago, Madame wanted to introduce her to a very good tailor. Elizabeth was a little embarrassed because, in fact, she had kept something wrong when she made such a promise. And then she still called him, and a man dressed very simply and of impressive size appeared in front of them. Hilary didn't expect to see someone who looked more like a loader or a handyman. Elizabeth then explained to her that this man named Jeremy was indeed a mercenary, but very talented. He was actually very famous among aristocratic women, and he really liked to change the outfits and jewelry that they threw away. But he became famous not because his clothes turn out to be very beautiful, but because it is very difficult for others to overtake him. Madame also admitted that Jeremy was from the common people and now asked for an apology for not telling the Marquise about it earlier. Only for Hilary his status didn't matter, if his skills were really as good as they say. The girl was pleased that she decided to seek help from Madame because she respected the culture and the common people. Hilary also really liked that Elizabeth really enjoyed friendships that transcended statuses. And then the girl laid out on the table the dress that she had brought with her, and it was from it that a great outfit should be made. Hilary also brought some jewelry, which she also offered to work on with this tailor. Before starting work, Jeremy asked if the girl had any favorite style. Next, he asked what kind of lace, ruffles, or embroidery she liked, as well as what colors she preferred. But the girl decided to trust his talent, because the main thing for her was that she looked very beautiful. She only offered to make the outfit not very sweet because Julia would be in it, and also asked that it turn out more modest. Jeremy thought for a moment, and then shouted sharply that he had come up with the most perfect outfit for the Marquise. The man immediately grabbed his notebook and ran to make sketches before he forgot, not even listening to the girl ask him to stay. Hilary was just trying to understand why he was asking for her opinion, if he was very quick at designing everything himself. Madame Elizabeth only giggled sweetly as she sat on the sofa, for at that moment the Marquise seemed a little amusing. But she also admired this girl because she came up with the idea of altering the dress and also became a consultant to the Crown Prince. And the girl was pleased that she managed to do all this, because she did everything only for the sake of her beloved. In the end, Madame only wished the Marquise that the Crown Prince's wife behaved as well and dignified as she did. Hearing this, Hilary even assumed that something had happened to the princess, but Madame immediately corrected herself. She explained that she was just worried, because of Countess Pamela there were some rumors. According to these rumors, Julia is obsessed with hierarchy and rejects aristocrats because she herself is from the common people. Then the Marquise suggested that because of these rumors there were also problems with tea drinking. And she also decided that the boundless trust in Julia, as in the original novel, just fell. But Madame assured me that the rumors were false and the princess had every right to be called the mother of the country, and soon everyone would have to admit it. Madame Elizabeth herself fully trusted the wife of the Crown Prince because she was also her assistant. At that moment, Hilary thought that in this case the novel could be considered finished, and Julia would remain the main character. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by Jeremy, who appeared so suddenly that they were even frightened. At the same time, he shouted that his idea in sewing at the moment was like a volcano. He has developed a design that will perfectly suit the Marquise both in appearance and age. And out of enthusiasm, he also made a lot of sketches and invited the girl to choose the one that she liked best. Hilary looked at it carefully, and from the look on her face, Jeremy guessed that she didn't like any of it. He himself considered his works not just perfect, but the best of all, and did not understand what she could not like. For a moment he even lost control of himself and almost burst into flames, but immediately came to his senses and apologized to the ladies. But in fact, all of Jeremy's designs seemed to the Marquise too chic, which were better than any new dress. And everyone who sees such a dress will immediately decide that it is more suitable for a ball and not for a simple tea party. Still, the girl continued to look at the drawings, and it seemed to her that something was still missing there. At that moment, Jeremy began to prove that these were only sketches that he had made just to stretch his arms. And then she settled on one option, but the tailor thought that perhaps this was not quite ideal for her. Only the girl insisted on her choice and ordered him to sew just such a model of dress. Soon there was a real commotion in the house of the Marquise, because everyone began to help Hilary prepare. The maids sometimes even argued among themselves so that no one would forget anything, neither perfume nor ribbons. And they all worked with a certain noise, which the Marquis did not like a little because he was awakened by it. But immediately the butler came to him, who explained that today the lady was going to tea with Her Majesty. At the same time, William wanted his master to take at least a little interest in this, because the Marquise was doing everything for him. Then he confessed to Christian that the lady had to alter her old dress due to lack of time. The Marquis wondered why Hilary hadn't approached him since he could help her with money. But the butler reminded him that the lady had promised not to use his property for her own sake. And when everything was finally ready, the maids could not get enough of how beautiful their mistress looked. The dress turned out to be really gorgeous and even emphasized the girl's figure. Hilary did not forget to thank the maids for their help, and they, in turn, could not believe that such an outfit turned out of an old dress. The girl explained that such beauty turned out thanks to one talented tailor, who also quickly coped with the work. Jeremy himself admired his work and admitted that it was the best dress he had ever made. And the Marquise herself did not expect that it would turn out so well, because it did not even look so beautiful in the drawing. But for a tea party, this dress did not seem so splendid to Jeremy, and he and Madame Elizabeth even tried to dissuade the Marquise. They believed that Hilary should outshine everyone at the tea party, especially the princess, who tried to dress her best. However, this tea party was the first official event in the status of Marquise, and many people would see her for the first time. Therefore, Hilary believed that the outfit should be elegant and without numerous unnecessary details. At the same time, the girl also agreed that this dress looks too simple for a royal tea party. And then Hilary turned to the tailor again, thinking of a way to decorate the dress well. The girl advised him to break mother-of-pearl shells and then decorate his dress with these pieces. After all the work was done, the outfit was as if covered in jewelry dust. And when the girl in it moved, it sparkled very beautifully as if it cost a lot of money. It's just that Hilary saw a similar dress in one of the magazines before moving into the novel, so she decided to use this idea. Still, she was sincerely grateful to Jeremy because he put his soul into the creation of this dress. It was a great honor for the tailor to sew a dress for the Marquise, and he was only willing to have her address him again. And while they were discussing it, Christian suddenly peeked into the room, who did not knock because the door was open. Still, he took his wife and the tailor a little by surprise, as they were completely absorbed in thoughts of the dress. Hilary decided that she had done something wrong again, since the Marquis himself decided to come to her. And Christian just froze in place, staring at the dress, which did not look like an altered one. Then, without further ado, he took out a bag of gold coins and asked his wife to give it to the tailor. Jeremy was extremely surprised, and the Marquis explained that he had only brought him the proper budget. Christian also asked the tailor not to hesitate to use it, and he immediately thought that he could open his own clothing store. After that, the Marquis turned and left the room without saying another word, and Hilary tried to figure out what it was. The maids also began to whisper softly, not understanding why the master left so quickly, because the mistress was so beautiful. But Hilary did not see anything strange in this, because she knew that for a Marquis, only one girl could be beautiful, and that was Julia. The Marquise knew this from the very beginning, so she knew that there was no need to be sad about it. But suddenly the Marquis, who had almost left the room, suddenly turned around and turned to his wife. He looked at her more attentively and good-naturedly this time, and then admitted that this dress suited her very well. The girl did not know what to say in response because, on the one hand, she was pleased that he paid attention to this. But at the same time, she remembered that Julia still remained in his heart, who also thought he was very cute. Christian only wished the Marquise a good time and headed for the exit again. The girl understood that there was no need to pin any hopes, because the Marquis only paid her a compliment at parting. And although she was a little embarrassed, she knew better than anyone else who Princess Julia was to him. The girl looked at the bag of coins and convinced herself that a simple compliment from her husband was enough for her. Since Hilary got to this estate, Christian came to her for the first time on his own initiative. And then he only explained his visit by the fact that he brought the due budget and nothing more. But even despite this, the girl could not leave everything as it was and just let him go. As soon as he crossed the threshold of the room, Hilary shouted words of gratitude after him for coming to cheer her up. The latter nodded approvingly, and the butler was even a little glad that his master had paid attention to his wife. Still, William, who followed him to the office, then asked why he left so quickly. But Christian explained that the Marquise was just a pretext, and he just wanted to make sure that the altered dress would not damage his reputation. Then the Marquis also wondered whether he himself believed what he had said, for his feelings were now a little different. He again remembered the image of his wife, in whom he saw a charming and cheerful girl who helps him from the bottom of her heart. After a while, Hilary arrived at the palace and was in a good mood. The girl was the first of the aristocrats to greet Countess Pamela in this way, who politely greeted her. The girl immediately began to ask her about her appearance, admitting that she was a little worried. The Countess assured that everything was fine and that today, as promised, she would become an ally of the Marquise. Then Pamela admitted that in fact she did not think it was right and had a little doubt. Next, they went to the hall where the tea party was supposed to take place, and this hall was located in the main palace of the Emperor. This was because, thanks to the foresight that the Emperor would soon fall, John decided that it would be better for him to be closer to Julia. The girl herself did not expect that the prince would trust her so much, but she reminded the Countess that she had to act according to the plan. And then Hilary added that if Pamela was worried, she would take matters into her own hands and should be trusted. The Countess became more and more convinced that the Marquise was a rather unusual person and that her very presence was encouraging. Hilary expressed her delight at the compliment that the Countess herself had paid her, and thanked her intriguingly. The rest of the aristocrats who had been invited to the tea party had already begun to gather in the hall, and when everyone was gathered, the wife of the Crown Prince, Princess Julia, joined them. Everyone bowed to her, and Hilary thought that the incident with Christian that morning had been a good start. The girl decided that this day would be very suitable to show the true face of the main character. The princess at this time began her speech about how she was very happy to see everyone and hoped that they would have a good time. The guests immediately responded with wishes of good luck to the imperial family and gratitude for the invitations. With Julia's arrival, the tea party was declared open and Hilary was given a seat at the same table as her. The Marquise at first thought it was because of her status, but she also decided that the place would be useful to her. Other aristocrats at this time expressed their admiration that they decided to hold a tea party right in the imperial palace. Many also believed that it was due to His Majesty's virtue, and they believed that he loved them all. At the same time, Hilary saw how happy everyone was, including the princess, and did not understand how she could behave like this after her prophecy. The girl thought that it might be because of the room, but with the exception of close people, the friendliness of the others simply infuriated her. Julia herself at this time looked like someone who was loved by absolutely everyone, and this also annoyed the Marquise a little. After all, when she read the novel, the princess was not so friendly, but on the contrary, she was a cool character. At the same time, the Marquise tried to keep eye contact with Julia, but she did not seem to want to meet Hilary's gaze, and she was still trying to find out what the princess really felt and how upset she was. At this time, the maid rolled a table with snacks into the hall, which she rolled straight to the princess. Julia decided to boast to everyone that she had prepared these snacks herself and recommended trying them. Hearing this, the Marquise felt a little disgusted, and she even lost her appetite because she knew how she cooked. But then, when the tray was opened, Hilary saw that the treats were not at all like what they usually cook themselves. The pieces of cake and the iced cookies looked exactly like the ones the Marquise could buy for herself even if she wasn't rich. And the princess at this time looked very pleased because she tried to arrange everything so that everything was at the highest level. With this, she also wanted to convey her message, in which she criticizes the luxury of aristocrats. Now Hilary realized that the heroine of this novel had been walking on a flower path all her life, fenced off from problems. And no matter what she did, everyone around her praised her. But that was only the case in the novel she read. In the same reality that Hilary found herself in, the princess was very arrogant and even seemed proud of it. Nevertheless, she began to offer the guests at her table to drink tea, the aroma of which she considered simply unsurpassed. Then the Marquise decided to suggest that Julia had prepared all this in order not to forget her peasant origin. And then she looked intriguingly at the other ladies and asked if they agreed with her. Hilary also admitted that for her, these sweets undoubtedly bring back memories, although for others they look rustic. At the same time, the girl continued to watch others who were eating cookies and cakes, and then she decided to ask the princess how she was doing with Madame Marion, and if anything had happened. Julia did not understand why the Marquise decided to ask her this question, and she explained that her hand was not felt here. Hilary also added that everyone already knows from the conversation of the maids that everything was prepared in accordance with their wishes. But for all that, Madame Marion was nowhere to be seen at this tea party, and it seemed to her that it was not for nothing. In fact, the Marquise wasn't sure if Madame herself had decided not to come here, or if it was the princess's wish. But the bottom line was that Julia was having trouble with the Emperor's maidservant, and Hilary couldn't miss the chance to show it to everyone. In response, the princess said that she was the wife of the Crown Prince, who should serve as an example for all residents of this country. And if she had been helped by maids, it would have been like an ordinary tea party, so she decided to arrange everything in her own way. She also prepared these treats in the hope that the guests would want to try them, and also hoped that they would enjoy it. The princess then expressed her expectation that her will would set a good example for all. To this, the Marquise expressed her hope that all would understand the deepest meaning of her highness. And the princess almost melted from such words, thinking that Hilary understood her idea. Then Julia nevertheless spoke about the Marquise's outfit and suggested that next time we dress more appropriately. Hilary took this as the princess criticizing her dress, which she had worked so. But looking at Julia's calm look, she thought maybe she should ignore it. At the same time, because of the atmosphere that had formed, she wanted to speak out about her expressions of regret. After all, usually such dresses are decorated with expensive jewelry, and perhaps Julia perceived the outfit of the Marquise as an unnecessary luxury. At the same time, her own gorgeous dresses were made of the best fabrics, and Hilary did not understand why she deserved such words. At some point, the Marquise felt a kind of shock but tried to restrain her composure. At this time, the Countess, who was sitting next to her, showed the girl the agreed sign which they had agreed on beforehand. This was a signal that the Marquise could now say whatever she wanted, and Pamela would pick her up in the right place. The girl could not even believe that the Countess had really agreed to this, and she was very happy about it. It was reassuring for Hilary to have the Countess by her side, and she prepared to deliver her speech. Then the Marquise rose, and then began to explain to the princess that there had been a misunderstanding. Then, with some embarrassment, she admitted that this dress was made from one of her favorite outfits, and it shines only thanks to the coating of pieces of shells, so it seems that the dress is covered with something precious. Now the princess was somewhat shocked by the fact that the Marquise had come to the tea party in an altered dress, but at the same time she noticed that it really looks very beautiful, and the shells give a special charm. Then another aristocrat came up to the Marquise with a friend and admitted that she could not take her eyes off her outfit. This girl also admitted that she would never have thought that a tailor could renew an old dress so much. Then this aristocrat took the liberty to ask who this tailor was. The Marquise replied that his name was Jeremy, but then she realized that they didn't know him, judging by their outfits. However, she explained to them that they most likely did not know him because he was a commoner. The girls were immediately amazed because they would never have thought that a commoner could create such a dress. But they also suggested that he might have succeeded, since commoners were used to wearing altered clothes. Hilary realized that aristocrats would not stop emphasizing their origins anyway. At this moment, the Countess herself also noticed that this dress was very beautiful and would never have thought that it was sewn by an ordinary person. Pamela also added that now the culture and skills of the commoners seemed to her better than they used to believe. Then the Countess decided that in this case, she would like to try to entrust the Marquise with the production of a dress for her. Immediately a conversation began in the hall that if the Countess thought so, then many people were also willing to remake the dresses that they were sorry to throw away. And at this time, the princess decided to admit that now she was even ashamed of her dress, which she bought at a very high price. Now the Marquise looked at Julia even with some superiority, realizing that her idea was going according to plan. The princess really looked as if she was going to die of annoyance at that moment. Hilary was well aware that the prince's wife wanted to see a different scene at this tea party. Julia planned that everyone would treat themselves to sweets, even if they were not so luxurious. But she should have just got an ordinary chef, and also tried to live a little more economically. In addition, it would be necessary to change the treats of ordinary people in an aristocratic style, and it would get a good result. And then the Countess suggested that the Marquise could have created a beautiful dress without alterations and shells. Then she hinted that Marquis Christian simply did not give his wife a generous budget. After these words, Hilary showed sincere bewilderment on her face because they sounded like betrayal. The girl continued to stand near the table, silent for a few seconds, imagining what would happen next, and the Countess only modestly lowered her head as if she herself was embarrassed by her words. But in fact, Hilary was pleased that their conversation had come to such a point. After all, he and Pamela had agreed in advance so that they could naturally come to a conversation about Christian. The aristocrats who had been near their table decided to leave, not wanting to interfere in this conversation. Pamela then looked embarrassed as if she had asked the Marquise something inappropriate. But Hilary, trying to hide her joy, smiled sweetly at the Countess, claiming that she had said nothing wrong. And then the Marquise said with some pride that her husband personally took care of her, and this embarrassed the princess a little. Hilary also went on to say that Marquis Christian, as his wife, respects her completely. At the same time, the girl did not stop looking at Julia, from whom it was already clearly noticeable that she was hurt by this conversation. And then Hilary continued that she had great respect for her wise and wonderful husband, despite the fact that he was a harsh man. Afterwards, the Countess mentioned that His Highness the Crown Prince had previously openly criticized the Marquis's coldness. The princess reacted to these words, as if she had woken up from a kind of dream and decided to intervene. She wanted to explain why John was doing this, but the Marquise interrupted, reminding him that it was because of an old incident. Hilary also began to claim that she was sure that her husband did the right thing then. Julia's face changed again in the misunderstanding, and the Marquise noticed it perfectly well and decided to add more oil. Hilary asked her why she thought Marquis Christian had done something wrong. The girl was referring to the incident when her husband had poisoned Duke Oliver and his daughter. Then the Marquis forced them to drink poisoned tea, but his main motive was Julia and John. However, in addition to this, Christian had other reasons to deal with this problem himself. Duke Oliver's family was a typical family of villains in novels who committed crimes for their own gain. They kidnapped children, sold them into slavery, and also killed everyone who stood in their way. In addition, these people secretly hired warriors to attempt on the throne, and the Marquis considered this unacceptable. Christian then shared with John that he had some evidence of the crimes they had committed, and he believed that this was the only chance to destroy them, although the prince believed that it would be very dangerous for him to act alone. The Marquis also claimed that if the royal family made a move, then they could be counterattacked. Christian also continued to repeat that he was John's best friend, but above all, he supported the imperial family. Therefore, everything he was going to do was necessary for the empire and the emperor and his family, as well as for Julia. The princess remembered those times well, but now she did not understand what the Marquis meant by this. And then Hilary explained that if the Marquis had not done so then, the Duke would have rebelled. At the same time, people who now continue to live peacefully may have been sacrificed in the ensuing civil war. But the princess objected that the end should not be justified by means, and Christian committed a terrible act. Julia argued that there were national laws in the empire that everyone, even the Marquis, had to follow. In response, Hilary wondered why, then, following the laws, her husband was not punished for his crimes. Julia was silent for a moment, and the Marquise also froze in anticipation of her answering carefully and correctly. After all, if Julia agreed with her, the legitimacy of the position she had achieved thanks to the Marquis would be at stake. But if she denies it, it will only be ridiculous that she condemned the absolutely innocent Christian in this way. In any case, regardless of her answer, the princess will expose her duplicity to the world. Julia lowered her head in thought, not knowing what to do in such a situation. At this point, the Countess intervened and suggested that the Marquise should leave the conversation, although she knew that she cared for her husband. But at the same time, Pamela believed that Hilary had used a somewhat offensive language, and this could disturb His Highness. The princess did not expect that the Countess could intercede for her in this way, and even hoped for a favorable outcome. Hilary did not argue and only asked the Crown Prince's wife to apologize for possibly insulting her. She also asked the princess to generously spare her for such bold statements, because she was just worried about her husband. The girl also added that she was a little worried, since it was the first time at such an event, and asked for permission to go to air. As she left, the Marquise reflected on the fact that everything was going according to plan. She brought Julia to it, and the Countess then supported her. Going outside, Hilary found herself a comfortable bench where she was going to rest, just in time for the tea party. She had long wanted to sprinkle cold cider on the princess, as she herself had always done in the novel. To herself, the Marquise began to murmur about it, and at that moment the Crown Prince came up to her. He noticed that Hilary was sitting alone, and it seemed to him that she was puzzled by something, so he decided to come up and inquire. His appearance was unexpected for the Marquise, and she was worried that he might hear something from her muttering. But he did not show any sign of it, but only continued to stand proudly near the girl, waiting for her to greet her. Hilary didn't know where to start now, and the craziest thoughts began to swirl in her head. It lasted only a second, and then John leaned over her as if he were going to interrogate her. The girl even felt a little uncomfortable from such a closeness, and she leaned back a little as far as the back of the bench allowed her. John did not remain silent then and asked why she did not even greet him when he approached. He even hinted that because of her superpowers the girl began to behave arrogantly. Hilary decided not to argue with him and apologized, but he thought it was too late for that. Then John became curious why she was sitting here alone while the princess was having a tea party. The Crown Prince suggested that something could have happened between them, because he already knew his wife very well. In response, Hilary decided to ask him her own question, asking what he was doing here. He explained that he was just on his way to the tea room when he heard heavy sighs and came to check if anything had happened. The girl realized that he decided to support Julia only because he was her husband, but at the same time he did not even try to hide it. However, Hilary admitted that she had shown disrespect to the princess, so she went out to get some air. John was curious what she had said to his wife that caused disrespect. The Marquise explained that she wanted to restore her husband's honor and thereby unwittingly insulted the princess. The prince began to realize that Hilary was using Christian in order to fight Julia in a peculiar way. This began to anger him, but the girl explained the reason why she had talked to the princess about her husband. This reason was the same as the one for which the Crown Prince was now questioning her. John thought for a while and then assumed that the Marquise was just very fond of her husband. Trying to find the right answer, the Marquise looked away, but did not notice that Christian was not far from them. A few hours before, after Hilary had gone to tea, a letter had arrived at the Marquise's house. It was a letter from the Emperor asking him to visit the imperial palace at any time, even if it was today. His Majesty wanted to deal with the issue of ownership of the lands that Hilary had returned. Christian wondered that he had not yet had a proper conversation with the Emperor, but he feared that he might meet Julia again. These thoughts haunted him, and the butler, noticing this, became worried about his master. At first, William decided that the Marquis was not feeling well and decided to call a doctor for him. The Marquis at this time hoped that most likely the princess would not be in the Lion's Palace since she was holding a tea party. At the same time, Christian did not get out of his mind the words of his wife about the request to come to support her. After thinking a little more, for this reason, the Marquis finally decided to go to the Lion's Palace. And after a while, Christian was already standing in front of the throne on which the Emperor Dominic was sitting. He explained the reason why he had called the Marquis today because he really wanted to talk about his wife. Now the Emperor thought it was the right time to do so. After all, they had only discussed urgent matters before. Christian realized that the lands were just a pretext, and Dominic wondered why he had married so suddenly. The Emperor also hinted a little reproachfully that this marriage had taken place so quickly that the Marquis had not even informed him. Christian could not directly admit that it was because of the prince and princess, so he told a little about the Marquis's abilities. In addition, the Marquis explained that Hilary really genuinely cared about him and he couldn't reject her. Dominic listened to the interlocutor and realized that this girl really loved her husband. Hearing the words about love, Christian thought a little again, remembering how Hilary called him his favorite. He also still didn't understand what made a man he hadn't even met before fall in love with him. Also, the Marquis still did not know exactly what pushed her to do the things she did for him. Remembering all the things that the Marquis had done, Christian realized that this was true love. After talking to His Majesty, the Marquis went back, where he heard the voice of the Crown Prince. He was curious because he also heard the voice of his wife, so he came closer to find out everything. Christian didn't understand why Hilary, who was supposed to be at the tea party, was here at the moment. And then he heard John asking why she loved the Marquis so much, if she had never met him before the wedding. The girl was a little embarrassed because she did not know what to answer the prince at this moment, and to answer in a way that sounded plausible. But then she decided to go on the attack herself and began to tell that she would need at least a week to explain the reasons. She then began to list what beautiful eyes and hair Christian had, especially obsessing over the detailed description of his hair. Hilary also began to talk about the qualities of the Marquis, which are so good that they are quite rare in humans. And then the girl also explained that her husband has a very strong heart. In addition, he can do a lot of other things. All this began to bore the prince a little, and he asked the Marquise to stop, although she herself was carried away. At this time, Christian, who was standing behind a tall bush, realized that he didn't really want to know the reasons for her love. But after thinking for a while, the Marquis decided that this girl really loved him very much. The prince insisted that she stop, and after that they returned to tea as he wanted to look after Julia himself. And after the celebration, when the Marquise was leaving, she thought that she would learn the public opinion about the princess from Pamela. In any case, her original plan went well, and suddenly Hilary noticed the carriage with Christian standing beside it. He also noticed his wife, and she decided to immediately come up to ask what he was doing here. The Marquis explained that he had come to meet the Emperor, and then decided to wait for Hilary to return home together. Christian also called her affectionately by her first name, which surprised the girl a little, because he had not addressed her like that before. The Marquise couldn't get enough of it, for it was the best thing she had done today, but she knew she had to hold back. The girl never thought that the Marquis would ever call her a diminutive nickname. This made the girl's heart almost jump out and her legs gave way, but she tried to control herself. In addition, she was very interested in why he decided to call her that, and also waited to go home together. When the driver gave the Marquise his hand to get into the carriage, he noticed that her hand was trembling and thought she was tired. But the girl assured that she was all right and ready to go, and then took her place in the carriage. And then it suddenly dawned on Hilary, because she hadn't told Christian that the tea party would be at the main palace. Now the girl did not understand how he guessed exactly where to wait for her, but she did not dare to ask. The Marquis, in turn, wondered why this girl would not ask him for help if she really loved him. Arriving at the estate, Christian gave his hand to his wife to help her get out of the carriage. The girl subtly hinted that today was not her birthday to take care of her like this, but the Marquis did not quite understand her. She was just a little embarrassed to lean on his hand like that, although it was also very pleasant for her. And giving her husband her hand, Hilary politely thanked him for such attention and care. At that moment, when the Marquise looked at him, he seemed to her unusually gallant and attractive. That evening, the girl felt very happy and it literally intoxicated her. Then Hilary had a rather vague memory of what had happened to her. She hadn't even paid attention to how she had gotten to her room. She also did not remember how she ate dinner and how the maids helped her take off her outer clothes. The girl could not believe that she could be so happy, because she tried only for Christian, and not for herself. Before returning from the tea party, the Marquise planned to put her diary in order and make new plans. But now she was not up to it. Hilary was in a great mood, and she decided that she would fall asleep like that. The girl did not even remember that she had ever been so happy since she got into this affair. But she also wanted to make Christian happy at all costs, and everyone who tormented him to kneel before him. At this time in the palace, the princess was reminiscing about the time at the tea party when Hilary reminded her of the Marquise. She thought that she was really wrong then, and the prince noticed her confusion. John saw that after the feast his wife became quiet and sad, but he did not understand what she could do wrong. Then Julia admitted that the Marquise was interested in why her husband was not punished according to the laws of the country. The prince then also remembered Hilary's words that she only wanted to restore the honor of her husband. For all that, the princess was sure that Christian had done wrong then, but she could not answer the Marquise. Julia did not understand why she had not condemned the Marquis yet, and now she saw a reproach in Hilary's words. The prince decided to support his wife, explaining to her that it is not easy to judge everyone by a single moral standard. Christian once committed an act for the sake of Julia and the entire empire, but she still did not condemn him immediately. This fact meant that over time she could change the whole situation, just like in earlier times. And after that, the three of them could be friends again, as before, but something still prevented this. Out of complacency, Prince John lost the only close friend who had been with him all his life. Now he stood in front of his wife and fell silent, feeling guilty in this situation. Julia noticed how embarrassed he was, and she couldn't quite understand why he was acting like this, and even sad, too. The princess hoped that John would assure her that she was not mistaken in her choice then. And then the prince raised his head and invited his wife to reconcile with Christian again. He began to explain that they were really indebted to the Marquis, and also reminded him that he had thought of giving his life for them. John also remembered that they had all been close friends before, and it was impossible to distance themselves so coldly now. But Julia explained that she, as a person and as a saint, had lived her entire life without renouncing her beliefs, and now she had no idea what her life would be like if she decided to forgive Christian. The prince noticed that this upset his wife even more and immediately decided to refuse his offer. He did not want the princess to cry and asked her to forget everything he had said to her. Julia did not know what to say next to her husband. She herself now had a huge lump stuck in her throat. A few days later, the butler knocked on Hilary's door and told her that 2 letters had arrived. He also explained that one was from Madame Elizabeth's salon and the other from His Highness the Crown Prince. The Marquise was greatly surprised why the prince had decided to send her a letter, since there were no events ahead. In the letter, John informed him that he knew what she had done at the tea party with the princess. He also understood that there was no point in questioning her, since she herself confessed to him in rudeness. At the same time, John hoped that the Marquise would soon come to the princess to ask her forgiveness. The girl was very angry at such a request, and she even instinctively crumpled up this letter. William noticed that his mistress was perplexed, but he did not dare to question her and thus get caught in the hot hand. Hilary did not understand why the prince was asking her to do this, because the tea party ended in a friendly atmosphere. The girl also assumed that, after all, rumors could spread about her argument with the princess. And also in these rumors it was discussed that the wife of the crown prince still despises the aristocracy. After all, Hilary made so much effort to turn public opinion away from Julia. At the same time, the girl thought that it would be better to just ignore all these rumors, as well as the prince's request. But she understood that in this case she could be arrested for insulting the imperial family. The Marquise, in addition to this, still had a lot to do. But first she decided to ask for an audience with the princess. The butler saw the Marquis's condition and he was very curious about what was in that letter. William then wanted to offer his help to his mistress, knowing that any little thing could come in handy. But he decided not to upset her even more, and remembering that she had not drunk anything that day, he offered to make excellent coffee for her. The butler hurried off to make the Marquise a drink, not even listening to Hilary begging him not to. He was always quite quick in his business, and soon managed to disappear from the room, leaving the lady alone. The girl did not bother to ask him anymore, and decided that while he was gone, she would read the letter from Madame Elizabeth. The Marquise began to read the lines on the paper carefully, and it was about a lesson, and Hilary was a little surprised. At this time, William had already managed to prepare a drink and was going to take it to his mistress. But then another maid stood on his way who claimed that it was her duty to bring hot drinks to the marquise. The butler still wanted to take the tray for Hilary himself, but the maid stubbornly refused to allow him to do so. At that moment, as they were arguing among themselves, the marquise swept by, nearly knocking them off their feet. The two servants immediately noticed her and wondered where she was in such a hurry, without even drinking coffee. Hilary didn't have time to explain everything to them, and she only asked to leave the drink in her room. Then she ran in her direction again, leaving the servants to guess what had happened to her so urgently. The marquis was drawing at the time and was distracted when Hilary burst in. He also wondered why his wife didn't come in as usual but burst in quite excited. At the same time, the girl even froze in place because the way he held the brush in his hands seemed to her an unusually beautiful sight. Her dreams were interrupted by Christian, who nevertheless began to ask what had happened to his wife. The girl really had a very important reason, because in the letter Madame indicated that the temple had begun to openly criticize the marquise. It said that in the opinion of the temple, this girl was blinded by profit and ignored all humanity. Hilary knew that they had decided to publicly humiliate her, as they didn't have the guts to fight her openly. Hilary also understood that if the nobles rebelled against Julia, the prince and the temple would keep a tight guard behind her. The marquise began to dig into her memory, trying to find at least something that could deal a big blow to the temple. The original role of this temple in this world was to treat ordinary people who could not afford specialist doctors. Such doctors were very expensive and worked mainly for the royal family or aristocrats. And the existence of Julia, who can use the divine healing power, only strengthened the position of the temple. Now Hilary wondered if she could stop people from going to the temple. Then she came up with the idea that people would be able to stop attending church if they did not get sick, because if there was no disease, then there was nothing to go there for. This idea seemed to the marquise simply brilliant, and now she came to her husband to talk to him about the methods of personal hygiene. At first, Christian did not quite understand what his wife wanted to achieve, and she explained that, in this case, many diseases could be prevented. And the first thing she proposed was to give people the opportunity to wash their hands with soap, which was a luxury, and only aristocrats got it. The girl suggested that you can simply not add essential oils to the soap, and then it will be possible to sell it at a lower price. In this way, the marquise was going to help the people, although she understood that it would take time to prepare everything. To do this, it was necessary to gather artisans who know how to make soap, as well as to launch a factory. After listening to his wife, the marquis realized that she offered to open an ordinary soap factory for him, but the girl did not quite mean it. Hilary immediately clarified that the marquis himself did not need to take care of anything, and she would take care of all the care. At the same time, she understood that her husband's name would accompany her everywhere, so she came to ask him for permission to do everything on his behalf. Then, with some modesty, the girl added that this business would also require some capital. The marquis replied that this would not be necessary because there was a working workshop on the liberated lands. This intrigued Hilary a little, and she thought he could provide her with this workshop. Then Christian suggested that his wife go there together and carefully inspect everything. The girl could not believe her ears that the marquis himself offered her to go with her to inspect the property. Just in case, she even asked her husband again to make sure that she did not hear. The girl's brain slowed down a little from this, and now it took her a few seconds to come to her senses. Christian noticed that something was wrong with his wife and wanted to help her, but she only asked her to wait a little. The marquise needed to catch her breath, so she went back into the room from the terrace and hid behind the door. She kept repeating quietly to herself that her beloved had invited her to go together, as if it were some kind of prayer. The girl also hoped that since he made such a proposal, it meant that he was getting much better. Hilary really wanted to ride with him outside the mansion, and she tried to imagine how it would all end. But her thoughts were interrupted by Christian, who, worrying, nevertheless went after his wife to check on her. For a moment it seemed to him that the marquise simply did not want to go with him, and explained that she should not do so. But she immediately objected and explained that she was pleased to go with him. She just did not want to disturb his vacation. Hilary wished her husband to be comfortable, and she would be able to go to see the workshop herself. Then Christian added that there were rumors that he was very ill, especially since the news of his marriage came as a surprise to everyone. Now people thought that since the mistress was engaged in all the housekeeping, the marquis was not really healthy. Christian decided that if he started appearing in crowded places, then all these speculations would quickly disappear. At that moment, Hilary thought that she herself was not doing well with her own affairs, but her husband immediately added something. He knew that she was doing well with internal affairs and that the inhabitants were very grateful. Then the Marquis added a thank you on his own behalf for having tried so hard for him. From such words from Christian, Hilary instantly disappeared any feeling of anxiety, as if it had never existed. Then, in response, she expressed her gratitude to him and also assured him that all those rumors were just idle chatter. She also understood that they would meet many people on the trip, and she was worried that it would be difficult for the Marquis to face old memories. Christian still insisted on the trip, and the Marquise then decided that it was necessary to take a first aid kit with her. All the girl's actions at that moment somehow reminded the Marquis of himself, and he understood that he had to respond to her efforts. And when Hilary finally fell silent, Christian suggested that she make this trip in the coming week. Then the girl remembered that she needed to meet Julia to apologize to her, and now Hilary was faced with a rather difficult choice, but the trip with Christian seemed much more important to her. Although, on the other hand, if she chose to travel, it would mean that she had directly ignored the prince's word. And then Christian seemed to read his wife's thoughts, offered her to go at a later time if she had urgent business. Hilary did not want to debug this trip and promised that she would handle her business very quickly. And very soon the Marquise went to the palace to meet the princess, who did not expect to see her so early. Julia was even surprised at how quickly Hilary wanted an audience, and she admitted that she was tormented by her conscience. The Marquise was still glad that the princess agreed to receive her, but in fact the girl had something else in mind. In words, Hilary expressed her regret that the crown prince's wife had to be disappointed in her. Hilary also promised to go to the temple soon to repent and reflect on her sins. Julia listened to the Marquise, who spoke very sincerely and believed her words. Hilary also remembered that she needed to return as soon as possible, and hurried to take her leave. But the princess was not ready to let her guest go so quickly and asked her to linger. Julia remembered the prophecy that His Majesty would soon fall, and wondered if the Marquis had seen anything else. Hilary immediately froze in bewilderment as the thought that something terrible had happened flashed through her mind. Then the princess admitted that last night the emperor felt dizzy and lost consciousness. Julia was nearby at that moment and immediately used her healing abilities. Hilary thought that if she had avoided a major accident, there was no need to ask her for foresight. But looking at the princess, the Marquise assumed that she had already begun to have problems with her superpower. Julia immediately protested and assured that everything was fine with her divine gift. But it was obvious from her face that she was not saying something, and Hilary realized that as a saint, she was getting weaker and weaker. The only difference now was that Julia began to act immediately after the emperor became ill. However, the Marquise realized that his body could not be healed completely, and now Julia asks for her advice. The Marquise immediately apologized that she didn't intend to humiliate the princess's abilities, she just had a vision recently. Hilary admitted that the event was significant, and at first she thought it was worth talking about it with the crown prince. But since the princess was also involved in this matter, the Marquise now thought that it was necessary to speak to her first. And then Hilary revealed to the princess the terrible truth that in less than 2 years, her divine power would disappear. Julia even turned pale from what she heard, and her breath caught in her throat, because this was what she cherished so much. The princess also couldn't believe it because she was sure that this power was granted to her by a god. But Hilary assured that she told only what she saw and did not embellish anything. The Marquise also added that her ability to foresee was granted to her by God, and she was also worried. Then Hilary reminded her that her gift had been proven when she had told her about the border area. And in her thoughts, the Marquise only rejoiced that the princess would now have to admit that she was no longer a saint. The girl then put on an embarrassed face and admitted that she felt very sad when she saw it. Now Hilary could not even find the right words to tell the crown prince about all this. This frightened Julia quite much, but the Marquise believed that the prince should not be left in ignorance. Then the princess began to ask Hilary to keep quiet for the time being, and that she herself would tell her husband about everything. Julia insisted on it because it was about her personality, so she had to do it herself. Hilary saw the princess's eyes that were not feigned fright, and she knew she was ready to run away, just as she had done that time. Then the Marquise decided to give in to her request and promised that she would keep silent, since she asked so much. And then Hilary decided to give the prince's wife one piece of advice on how to hide it as long as possible. The Marquise leaned over and whispered a few words in her ear, and then explained that she was in a hurry, and again took her leave. So far, Julia's answers had been decisive, and this time, too, she shouldn't hesitate to confess everything to the prince. Now Hilary wondered if they could survive this crisis together, and how the princess would feel now. A girl who had always been a saint, but also a commoner, and she had the power of healing. Previously, she had thought that the Holy Father might be puzzled, as there was little she could do with her lineage. But then the prince and Christian began to claim that her abilities were very valuable and God chose her for his own reasons. The Marquis at that time did not stop repeating that Julia was special, and this began to inspire her. After that, people reached out to her for healing and in return sincerely thanked her and prayed for her. And after a while, Julia is old as the wife of the crown prince, and since that time her life has changed. At that time, she did not yet know everything that awaited her, and hoped that she would have a very happy life. After all, the prince himself chose her as his wife, and at the same time he greatly appreciated her abilities. Now Julia could not believe that God could leave her and she would lose her gift. The princess reassured herself that everything would be fine, because she was the wife of the crown prince of this empire. In the meantime, the marquise had already returned home, and the next morning she and Christian set out on a trip. The marquis noticed that his wife was worried about something, but the girl just looked at her husband again. At the same time, she remembered that because of this trip, a real mess reigned in the house, because she tried to collect everything that could be needed. In addition, the girl was very happy that she was able to deliver a sudden blow to the princess. And now on the road, Hilary knew that with all these thoughts, she looked unsettling. The marquise also remembered that in the novel, these lands, where they were headed, were the main place of important actions for Christian and Julia. Once the marquis invited her there for a date, and there she helped a child who was begging for alms. Julia found out that the boy was doing this because his parents were sick, and she went to heal them. For this reason, the marquise now understood that this place could be dangerous because of the memories of the princess. Also, she herself now has to face these memories, but she was ready for this meeting. Then the marquis suddenly remembered that his wife had already come here with William and thought that things were very bad here. But the girl immediately objected and assured that this was a very good place and she went just to look around a little. This area was wide and located along a large river. In addition, trade was also well developed here. Everything was as described in the novel, and Hilary remembered again how Julia had healed the child's parents. At the same time, Christian felt a little ashamed that she had to see a child begging on his lands. And then Hilary repeated the words of the princess from the novel, that in this place you feel that people live and work to the fullest. Christian couldn't understand how his wife could exactly repeat what Julia had said in the past. The girl realized that she had said it unintentionally. She was just so thoughtful that the words came out of her mouth. Now she reproached herself and did not know how to justify herself in order to remove any suspicion from herself. At that moment the carriage shuddered and the girl even fell into the seat, but rather she did it on purpose to distract the marquis's thoughts. She began to explain that although she had been riding in carriages for quite a long time, she still could not get used to this rumble. Christian, noticing his wife's condition, was worried about her, and she paid more attention to how he held himself. Then Hilary assured him that she was fine, but she could tell from the look in his eyes that he wasn't convinced. The marquis simply noticed that the ribbon was untied on her hair and immediately decided to remedy the situation and help his wife. The girl could not believe that Christian was doing something for her again, and at that moment the carriage shuddered again. The marquis could not resist such a push and almost fell on Hilary, but he managed to grab the back of the seat in time. The marquise was a little frightened by this situation, and Christian immediately began to apologize for not keeping his balance and was about to move away. But the bumps in the road did not stop, and he decided that it would be safer to stay in this position for the time being. The marquis just didn't want Hilary to fall out of the seat and hurt herself, and she, in turn, curled up in a ball. But then she felt his hair, which was hanging over her, begin to tickle her a little. Her heart at that moment was beating so hard that she thought she would die from the fact that it could jump out. And then Christian wondered if the marquise could see such a situation in his visions. The girl did not immediately understand what he meant, and the marquis explained that he meant the situation when he was there with Julia. Hilary didn't understand how her husband could still think about such a thing in such a situation, but she confirmed that she had seen it, but for a long time. Christian now understood why it seemed to him that the marquise knew the past better than the future. Hilary herself understood that if he was thinking about it, then he was still weak psychologically, and she needed to be careful with her words. Presently the carriage stopped, and the coachman knocked, asking if the door could be opened as they had arrived. The marquise asked to wait a minute as she wanted to adjust the outfit, but she did not notice that they had arrived so quickly. When she opened the door, the cabman expressed his anxiety that she had not gone out for so long. But the girl felt perfectly fine, and the only thing that did not leave her mind was the marquise. After that, she got out of the carriage and was able to distract her thoughts with what she saw in front of her. There, in the courtyard in front of the entrance to the building, there was a large table with benches, and it was a place where you could sit for a little in the fresh air. The Marquis immediately explained to his wife that this was a place for entertainment, and she could do whatever she wanted here. He then showed the room inside and explained that 20 workers could fit there, who were ready to get to work right away. Also in this place, transport was well developed to move materials and products. In addition, there is also a large storage warehouse, and the girl wondered why this place was still empty. In any case, she liked it here and assumed that there should be no problems with mass production. Also, the girl did not forget that she had to take care of the Marquis, and he, in turn, asked if she had gathered all the soap makers. Hillary was a little ashamed to admit to him that in fact everyone had expressed disapproval. After all, the soap here was all made by hand, and for them it was something like a work of art. Then the girl suggested that it was simply unpleasant for workers to make so much soap at one time. Even the diligent efforts of Jeremy, who helped her, did not help to invite workers. The Marquise did not immediately remember this man, and Hillary reminded her that he was the tailor who had made her dress. Christian then wondered how close she had become to him, and she explained that she could trust him with this job as well. It seemed to her that, judging by his profession and skills, artisans in this field should know him well. At the time, the Marquis did not understand why it might be difficult for this man to find artisans in the soap factory. Then he decided that if the tailor couldn't do it, it was his turn to meet them and talk to them. The Marquis also promised his wife that in the near future he would gather workers for this factory, and that she would not worry. The girl was again somewhat delighted, but she could not understand why Christian decided to take on this case. And when it seemed to him that Hillary did not want his help, she immediately protested, explaining that he had already helped her a lot. Then she repeated again that the Marquis should not overdo it on account of her, and that she did not wish to disturb his peace. The Marquis then added that he was doing this for the sake of these lands as well, suggesting that the problems here had arisen because he had loosened his grip. At that moment, it seemed strange to the girl that her husband would help his wife in such matters, and she felt embarrassed. Then the cabmen came up to them and stood beside them, as if they were expecting them to continue the conversation. Christian asked why they had come to see him, and they reported that a visitor had come. Hearing this, the Marquis was even a little surprised because the workshop had been empty for so long, and then suddenly a visitor. And while the cabmen were trying to explain, a man immediately entered the door, who immediately addressed the Marquis with the Marquise. It was old Carl, who was worried that they had not arrived on time, and immediately rushed here as soon as he heard the sound of the carriage. He also wondered why the gentlemen were in such a squalid place and not in the residence, and he was also worried that something had happened. Then the coachman proclaimed with some enthusiasm that the headman had arrived in these parts, and that he was always so groovy. The Marquise immediately turned to him, explaining that he should not have fled like that, but he only bowed to her respectfully. The girl did not want Carl to strain with his sore knees, but he again reminded that he was worried about them. Christian watched his wife's communication with this man, and it seemed to him that she was closer to him than to him. But Hillary became close to the headman because she often exchanged news with him as internal affairs managers. Then Carl still asked what had brought the gentleman to the old workshop, which had been empty for a long time. Christian then explained to him that he and his wife had come so that she could see the room she was going to use. Hillary was again pleasantly perplexed by the fact that the Marquis called her wife, and in front of everyone. And he called her not just his wife, but his wife, and the girl was again confused by all the thoughts in her head. Then the girl remembered that on paper they were really married, and she herself called him her husband in front of others. And now Hillary wondered if she could consider herself even a little acknowledged after he had called her his wife. Involuntarily, the girl began to clench her fists happily, and the Marquis thought that this girl was up to something again. At this time, she was approached by Carl, who asked her to tell him what equipment she was going to use. Hillary had done a good job with internal affairs before, and now the headman wanted to do his best for her. The girl was grateful to the old man for his concern to put this room in order so that soon they could open the factory. She was also very grateful to the Marquis because now she had received a reward for her efforts. Christian, calling her his wife again, also expressed admiration that she had done well in their domain. Hillary still couldn't get used to her new title, but it made her genuinely happy. The headman also admitted that he now really likes how the embankment was restored. The girl explained to the Marquis that after last year's flood, she had decided to repair something after an inspection with William. It was also the flood that was the beginning of Julia and John's love, and these lands suffered the least damage. Most of all, the embankment suffered here, and a considerable amount of money had to be invested to repair it. The headman was very glad that the Marquise had taken it upon herself to take care of this. They then went to the residence, where Carl offered to take a look at the construction log and accounting records. The Marquis remarked that Hilary was in charge of everything, although he thought that such matters would be handled by William. Then Christian thought about what his wife was able to do thanks to his participation, but he liked that she was coping. The girl also decided to look there, explaining that she had not yet received a report about it. The Marquis did not mind because it was she who took care of all this and handed her the magazine. Hilary began to look at what was written there, and Christian even thought that something was wrong. The Marquis simply noticed some deviations from the original amount, but they were not large. Her husband thought she had done this before, but Hilary explained that she had other assignments. She did not work with such a person, but the butler helped her well, and the Marquis still thought that his wife was already familiar with such matters. The girl only assured that she was a good student because she was a Marquise and should be able to do it. Then she instructed the headman to inspect the repaired embankments annually. Carl was a sincere man and never lied for his own gain, so he could be relied upon. Such trust is only achieved at the expense of those who help, and Hilary also attracted others with her charm and skill. After that, the headman invited the gentleman to go and inspect the embankment itself, where the dam was also leveled. The girl thought that this was a great idea, because this way she would be able to check the estimate to check everything. And then Hilary thought that the Marquis and the princess might be walking in that place, and it would bring back memories of him. She wanted to see everything there, but she couldn't take Christian with her, so she decided to postpone it for another time. And as soon as she expressed her refusal, the Marquis said that he was willing to go there and look around. Christian explained that he wanted to see it with his own eyes, as it was the result of her efforts, and he considered the dam itself a very picturesque place even before it was repaired after the flood. The Marquis also decided that now was a very good time to appear in public as a married couple. Then Christian gave his wife a hand and suggested that we go there together and not put it off for later. At first, the girl even thought that it was a dream, but 3 years have passed since she got into this affair. She understood that this was not a dream, but life as Hilary still remained only a dream for her. And now she could enjoy this dream, especially today when everything really did feel like a dream. Soon they went to see the rebuilt dam and other places that were nearby. At the same time, the girl noticed that she was walking with the Marquis separately, and the others kept some distance. Looking around, she noticed the multitasking glances of the escorts, showing that they understood everything and did not want to interfere with the couple. Hilary also had never thought that Christian would agree to go, and now she was walking with him holding hands. All her thoughts were filled with her beloved again. But then the girl remembered something else. After all, this dam was already there when she came to look at the embankment last time. The Marquise also knew that the view was very beautiful, as Christian had told her. The girl also thought that the Marquis was now overwhelmed with emotions associated with this beautiful place. But there was nothing she could do now, and she could only wait, walking slowly beside him. Suddenly, the Marquis decided to ask her himself if she knew that he had walked here with Julia before. Hilary was a little confused, but still admitted, though not immediately, that she knew about it. Then Christian noticed that nothing could be hidden from his wife, but this did not sadden him at all. The girl was confused again, this time even a little more, not knowing what else her husband would say to this. But then she decided to ask him that in that case he didn't need to pretend that everything was fine. Then the Marquis remembered that Julia was a really good person who always illuminated everything around her. He remembered the moment when they were standing by the river. The princess then noticed something in the water and asked him to come over to take a look. Christian approached but did not notice anything, and Julia explained that the sun was very beautiful on the water. The princess liked it so much that she also wanted the Marquis to see this beauty, and she herself was so radiant that day that Christian did not dare to touch her. As he said this, Hilary felt a lump in her throat and tried to swallow it with difficulty. The Marquis noticed that the girl did not feel very comfortable from such conversations, but the Marquis reminded him again that thanks to Julia, he was able to experience the precious experience of love. And now she herself cannot feel uncomfortable because of this, admitting that the princess is really a bright person. Hilary also noticed that this world was dizzy with its complexity and intricacy, and Julia always knew what to look at. Listening to his wife, the Marquis decided that in this case they themselves were looking too closely at this world. But the girl believed that it was enough to live a simple life, and Christian's life was quite cruel. After all, he wanted to be recognized more than anything in the world, but the man he loved only condemned him. That's why Hilary hated Julia, but that didn't mean for her that Christian had to hate her either. The Marquise hoped that it would remain just a pleasant memory without leaving behind deep wounds. Then, looking at her husband, Hilary suggested that he also try to live a simple life. She also assumed that the Marquis would be able to save her from difficult and complex tasks. Christian, who had been listening to her attentively, thought it was even funny, but he did not dare to tell her yet. Still, from the expression on his face, the girl realized that he thought it was funny and immediately felt embarrassed. Hillary felt for a moment that she was burning with shame because of what she had said, and she did not know where to go now. And then the girl again turned her attention to her husband's hair, which was longer than hers, and she couldn't understand why. But in any case, Christian was still her favorite person, and she was even sorry that this was not the real reality. As she thought about it, Hillary touched her hair, and again she noticed that it was in disarray, and this upset her a little. But suddenly the Marquise came up to her and asked if it was not too late to say the words she had just said. The girl did not understand what he meant, and then the Marquis explained that she herself had already done everything for him. At the same time, Christian carefully straightened his wife's hair so that she did not look so disheveled. And then he added that, in addition to this, he was grateful to her for many other things that she had done for him. Now Hillary felt a kind of stupor again, from which she could not utter a single word, as well as move. Then the girl noticed that Christian, while he was fixing her hair, began to lean closer and closer to her. The next moment, however, she felt that he was tying a ribbon around the back of her head so that the wind would not ruffle her hair now. Then the Marquis corrected it a little more to make it look prettier and hoped that she would like it. Hillary also felt that something had been added to her hair and she reached out to check. After that, she felt for one of her favorite hairpins, which now adorned her head. The girl had forgotten all about it and realized that the Marquis had had the hairpin since the time when their carriage had swayed. Her thoughts were interrupted again by Christian, who admitted that the embankment was indeed beautifully renovated. The girl reported that this was due to the fact that the Marquis gave a correctly approved budget on time. But Christian interrupted her again, saying that he himself should be grateful to her and so many times. For a moment, the girl thought that this could be the end of the affair, but she could not get out of it yet. It's just that now history was a little different and she needed to find the meaning of life here. The meaning is not just for her as a person, but for Hillary's heroine, whose target was Christian. Soon after they had looked around, the Marquis invited his wife to return home. For some time, the girl walked in silence, because she was very grateful to her husband for many things, especially today. All this time, she understood that except for her beloved, everything else was only a meaningless text for her. A few days later, after they had gone to inspect the land, Madame Elizabeth called on the Marquise. She immediately admitted that she knew that Hillary had gone there with her husband. Elizabeth also admitted that in high circles they only talk about this, so she could not help but find out. Hillary, on the other hand, had been very busy lately, so she had to miss a few lessons. But she realized that the rumors spread very quickly, and then she also realized that Madame was interested in her date. The girl explained that it was not a date, but they just went to see the workshop that was in their possession. Then Elizabeth remembered that the Marquise had recently asked Jeremy to gather soap makers, and now she understood why. Madame also remarked that they were quite stubborn and very difficult to convince, and the Marquise confirmed that no one agreed. The tutor wanted to offer the girl her help, but she assured that now everything was fine. Hillary admitted that Christian, as if by magic, quickly picked up artisans. And two of them even decided to bring their students to the future factory so that they could already practice their skills there. The Marquis also thought that when soap production was established, it would be necessary to hire slum dwellers and pay them an allowance. He was also sure that after the artisans finished developing the technology, everything would go like clockwork. At the same time, the girl was very happy that her husband would be able to give work to the poor in this way. Madame Elizabeth was frankly shocked that the Marquis himself solved the problem so easily. Hillary confirmed that thanks to her husband, things are going really well with the soap industry. In addition, she was pleased that, in spite of the noise she had made at the princess's tea party, Madame had sent her a letter telling her about the temple. The girl liked very much that Elizabeth cared that there was no hostility or awkward situations towards the Marquise. With all this, Hillary realized that Madame's relationship with Julia had changed somewhat, and she decided to find out somehow. Then the girl thanked the tutor for the letter and also apologized for not having time to send her a response with gratitude. But Elizabeth did not worry about it, for she did not wait for an answer, and the Marquise asked how Madame had spent this time. Then she admitted that the reason for her visit was the wife of the Crown Prince. Hillary immediately thought that something serious had happened and prepared to listen carefully. Madame decided to share this information only with the Marquise and added that the princess was still not used to living in the imperial family. The girl understood that Elizabeth could not just say such words and began to question her further. Then the tutor also shared that according to rumors, Madame Marian decided to leave the imperial palace. Hilary couldn't believe that this woman, who had been the keeper of the palace, had now decided to leave her home. Elizabeth, however, added that at that moment the emperor and the crown prince immediately stopped her, but her intentions were still firm. Madame also believed that age and illness could be the reason for this, but she feared that it was most likely because of the princess. Then Hilary remembered that Marian's hand had not been felt at the tea party, and she thought that Marian had already decided to leave. Elizabeth also remarked that this was not a coincidence, and then remembered how bold the Marquise had been in speaking to Julia. Madame also assumed that Marian could no longer cope with the crown prince's wife due to her advanced age. And the Marquise suggested that the role of Madame Marian was now becoming more important, and it was necessary to ask the princess to behave more carefully. Elizabeth admitted that after she found out about this, she could not find a place for herself and calm down. Now Hilary realized that her tutor had given up on Julia, and she suddenly decided to make a request to the Marquise. The girl did not understand why Madame, who herself had abandoned Julia, was now asking her for a favor. Elizabeth confessed that she wanted to leave Her Highness, but for this she needed the help of the Marquise. Madame hoped that she would be able to talk to the princess and influence it in some way. Hilary was frankly surprised by such a request, but the madam was sure that she would succeed, because she had already done a lot. But the girl explained to the tutor that she was not sure that she would be able to talk to the crown prince's wife about this. The girl was also sure that the princess had turned away from her after that incident at the tea party. Elizabeth, however, began to assert that one mistake did not mean that the Marquise would not be able to take care of her. Madame was also sure that only Hilary would be able to influence Her Highness. Moreover, she was the only one who dared to speak directly. Not knowing what to answer at that moment, the girl asked to give her a couple of minutes to think, because this was not a simple request. Recently, Julia has become more harsh, and now she perceives a lot of things very sharply and emotionally. Madame Elizabeth remembered how she had decided to talk to the princess about Marian, but she would not hear it. The tutor also understood that if Her Highness continued in the same vein, she would quickly lose her authority. Elizabeth also hoped that the Marquise did not hate the princess, and the incident at the tea party was for the sake of reconciliation between Julia and Christian. In addition, Hilary has already earned the trust of Her Highness, even became an assistant, and now Julia needs her most of all. The Marquise was also curious whether Madame would have asked her for such a thing if she had not known about the incident at the tea party. This request also meant that Hilary would have to shoulder both the initiative and the responsibility. On the other hand, the girl understood that now Julia's condition was so bad that she did not even listen to Madame Elizabeth. The Marquise also understood that according to the princess's actions, she was now also at odds with John. And the crown prince had not yet invited Hilary to him, which meant that he did not yet know that his wife would lose her divine power. The Marquise then confessed to Madame Elizabeth that she could not resist such a heartfelt request. But in return for this, the girl asked that at a certain point, the tutor would also perform one service for her. In fact, the Marquise had no intention of helping Julia, even under the threat of her own death. By that time, in the palace itself, the prince was strolling in the garden and wondering why Madame Marian had decided to leave. After all, he remembered this woman when he was still young and how she took care of him then, replacing his own mother. Marian was always loyal to the imperial family and always took pride in her work. The crown prince himself always perceived this woman not as a servant but as a member of the family. Recently, he decided to visit her to try to dissuade her from such a decision. And when John came to her, she was already holding the suitcase in her hands again, but he began to ask to talk to him. But Madame Marian believed that His Highness would be able to become a merciful ruler, and God would take care of him without her. Then the prince made a bold assumption that it was because of Julia, but the madam still insisted that she was just tired. Marian did not advertise and admit that the real reason for her departure was the princess. Old-fashioned ladies were a hotbed of luxury for Julia, so she decided to have a tea party to declare her beliefs. But since the princess is the first member of the imperial family, Marian could not allow her dignity to be insulted. Therefore, she was embarrassed and withdrew from her main duties in the imperial palace. The prince was still convinced that Julia was the reason for her departure, and he understood that the others knew about it as well. He noticed that his wife had changed and even stopped taking care of the garden in which he was now wandering. Previously, the princess claimed that she felt peaceful when she saw beautiful flowers. She also advised her husband to try to feel calm while looking at them. To this, the prince began to wonder what he should do if the flowers did not help, and Julia was going to come up with something else. At this moment, when he remembered this, it seemed to him that the princess had called out to him. He immediately turned around, because it seemed to him that the voice sounded rather modest and pleasant. However, he did not see his wife in front of him. The marquise stood in front of him and tried to call him. Noticing that His Highness did not react immediately, the marquise even thought that something had happened to him. The prince could not admit to this girl that he was just worried about the circumstances, and also dreamed about the princess. But the sight of it still bothered Hilary, and she even tried to guess, but nothing came to mind yet. And John found himself that the marquise had arrived at the wrong time, and that at that moment he did not want to see anyone but Julia. He also thought that he was going crazy, because he thought that it was the princess who had called him now. However, he still realized that Hilary had not come to his wife, and began to wonder why she had visited him. The girl, having received a request from Madame Elizabeth, had no intention of meeting the princess in person. Hilary had intended to do something different, and now she had come to talk to John himself. At the same time, she did not even expect that she could meet him in the garden, on the way to his office. And as he stood there restlessly, the marquise could read on his face that something had happened. But for the time being, the girl doubted that he cared whether it was Madame Marian or the Emperor's health. The prince himself even considered it fortunate that the marquise had visited him, because he himself was going to talk to her. Hilary immediately thought that Julia had told her husband about her problems with her holy power. Instead, John wondered if it was true that the marquis had decided to get out of the house and inspect his property. The girl was very stunned by this question, because she did not expect this at all and was in the mood for something else. Still, the marquise explained to the prince that she herself had business there, so they decided to go together. Then the prince inquired about the marquis's condition, assuming that he was already better. Hilary explained that they had brought a doctor with them, and the prince realized that Christian's health was still not so good. The marquise found this strange, because before, while the prince was having fun with Julia, he did not care about the marquis's condition. And now, suddenly, when he was alone, he decided to take care and interest in his health. One thing Hilary was sure of so far, seeing the prince's reaction, that Julia had kept her prediction a secret. The girl even wondered how long the princess was going to keep this secret. But now, standing in front of the prince, the marquise began by expressing her gratitude for his concern for her husband. Then she confessed to him that he did not look the same as usual, but as if he was very upset about something. After that, the girl added that this was probably due to the fact that John was very worried about His Majesty the Emperor. She also admitted that she had heard from his wife that the foresight about the Emperor did happen. And the princess immediately used her saint power at that moment, but the prince still looks pale and anxious today. The marquise also added that she knew about the outcome before anyone else, so John did not need to hide anything from her. The prince explained that the Emperor just had a little difficulty moving, even though he had received power from Julia. Then, with concern in her voice, the girl stated that she knew that His Highness had not yet fully recovered. This made the prince quite agitated, and he wondered what it meant that the marquise knew about it. At this point, Hilary looked frightened, and assumed aloud that the princess hadn't told him anything yet. John still could not understand what he meant by the marquis, and what his wife had to do with it at all. But Hilary only said that her prediction had come true, and now she would no longer bother him. This angered the prince, for he thought that the marquise had decided to renege on her debt to him. As she walked away, Hilary only explained that the princess would reveal herself to him soon, just worried that she hadn't done it yet. The marquise also added that Julia must be in trouble with Madame Marian again, despite the fact that he and the Emperor had dissuaded her. And perhaps the princess guessed this, and now it is not clear who is the most authoritative person in the palace. The prince only became even angrier at such words and demanded that the marquise stop this conversation. But she finally expressed her regrets that John had made so many mistakes. She was referring to the Emperor who could not be cured, her and Julia's secret, and the change of authority in the palace ranks. But she hoped that the prince was still so smart and quick-witted, and he understood what she was getting at. John realized that the marquise was biting the princess at every turn, and this time he could ignore her words. At the same time, she was a meticulous person, and he knew that Hilary wouldn't just tell him all that. Then the prince began to be tormented by guesses about what his wife was hiding from him and was so afraid to confess. At the same time, she continued to act as usual, and even addressed him with a smile. Soon, John went to visit the princess, and she met him again, smiling as if she had no secrets. Julia had just made tea and immediately offered her husband to pour a cup for him too. The prince did not want tea and admitted that he had come to her with a very important request, and she noticed that he was not in a cheerful mood. John did not hesitate and asked his wife to heal his father again with her divine power. When he said this, the princess almost dropped the teapot from her hands because she knew how it could end. But then she decided to pull herself together, and in order not to give herself away, she burst into laughter, adding that he frightened her. Then Julia promised that she would definitely help the emperor and that she would visit him at noon that day. The prince thought that he had been mistaken in his terrible expectations and only apologized to Julia for disturbing her. And then he wondered if it would be too much, because she used power on the emperor in the morning and evening. The princess saw his sadness and assured him that he should not worry because she had not lost her strength. She also asked her husband not to doubt her divine power and abilities. Then she gently took her husband's hands and promised that His Majesty the Emperor would surely recover soon. The prince even seemed a little suspicious that the princess was so convinced that everything would be fine. He was about to ask her something else, but their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected knock on the door. Then the maid came in and reported that the high priests whom the princess had been expecting had come and were waiting in the drawing room. Julia saw this as a chance to avoid continuing the awkward conversation and immediately rushed to meet them. The princess explained to her husband that these people had an appointment with her today and asked him to meet later. When they went out into the corridor, the wife of the crown prince quickly went to the meeting as if she was late. This was also noticed by the maid, who could not understand where the mistress was in such a hurry, as if she were being pursued. And the princess at this time tried to understand, so her husband decided to talk about her strength, because he had never doubted her before. For a moment it seemed to her that he already knew about the terrible prophecy, and she was afraid that the marquise had told him everything. The princess even thought about going back and talking honestly with the prince, but something seemed to stop her. Julia also assured herself that it was not yet time to go limp, because the holy power had not yet completely disappeared. She decided that she would confess everything to the prince when this power was completely gone, while believing that the prediction might not come true. In any case, everyone will know when her divine power is gone because she will not be able to hide it. John, meanwhile, was again lost in the thought that everyone he trusted was now leaving him. In addition, his father's health is deteriorating, and his beloved wife has become somewhat suspicious. And all these events led him to Hilary, but he could not understand how she could be involved in this. Then he finally settled on the fact that this is his problem, that he cannot bring everything to the end. Before, when it got so tense and stuffy, Christian was always there for him and supported him. This brought back a lot of memories for the prince, and he decided that he needed to meet the Marquis. After a while, the Marquise finally waited for Countess Pamela to call her. She confessed to the Marquise in a letter that after the tea party, she became the only married aristocrat there, thanks to her. Also, that thanks to her friendship with Julia, socialites gave gifts to Her Highness and all sorts of other things. Hilary knew that everything was going better than expected, but the Countess wrote that Her Highness was not so easily revealed. The Marquise could say the same about Madame Marion, especially since she learned the news only after Elizabeth. In the letter, the Countess asked Hilary for her opinion on how anything else could be done in such a situation. Pamela also did not know that Madame Elizabeth was engaged in the education of the Marquise. Therefore, she decided that by maintaining connections and relationships with her, it would be good for her. Hilary had hoped that the Countess would be closer to the princess than Elizabeth, because if she wasn't, she could only change direction. Then the Marquise wrote a reply that she understood her fears and advised her to replace the young ladies around Her Highness. Hilary believed that the Countess would be more suitable for recruiting new young aristocrats than she, a commoner. The girl also mentioned that among these ladies there would be those who could not keep up with Julia's stubbornness and thrift. And then Pamela will be able to understand for herself what she will need to figure out and how to act. As the Marquise was about to mail this letter, she also thought that Prince John was suspiciously quiet. The girl was curious if he had talked to his wife and whether they had settled this misunderstanding. In any case, John would have called the Marquise, although she herself did not want to see either of them. Now the girl wanted to make sure that everything came to the script she wanted, and she began to imagine. And a few days later, she was already standing next to the prince and her husband, and they were looking at each other as if competing in beauty.